Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're a little bit behind, but we have a packed agenda today, and I want to welcome everyone to today's meeting. This is the regularly scheduled California Board of Equalization meeting. We have a special agenda prepared for everyone. This is the board work group we are convening. I want to just open with a few opening remarks, but first I will check in with Ms. Cicchetti to see if we need to take the roll.
Not for the board work group, no
All right.
role for the board work group, but I do have our business announcement on public safety,
Okay.
if I could. Good morning, Madam Chair and members. I would like to remind the audience to silence your cell phones and any other wireless devices. The current COVID-19 guidelines and procedures for the Board of Equalization require that all BOE employees must wear a mask while inside the BOE facility or while attending the BOE event. You may remove your mask when you're presenting before the board as a speaker while sitting at the table. Masks and hand sanitizer are available to all and can be found in the back of the auditorium. To speak before the board in person, please complete and submit to the clerk a public comment appearance sheet located at the entrance of the auditorium. If you wish to speak before the board by telephone, please dial the phone number and access code provided by the public agenda notice and follow the instructions of the AT&T moderator. We are having some technical difficulties with the closed captioner at this time. If you need that service, the service of closed captioning interpretation, please use the closed captioning service of the YouTube. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Cicchetti. All right, are you guys ready? Excited to get started? This is a great time. Thank you, Mr. Elliott.
You're welcome,
Appreciate
Madam
your
Chair.
enthusiasm. So good morning again. My name is Malia Cohen. I'm Chair of the Board of Equalization. And on behalf of the Board of Equalization, thank you for joining us today for the first meeting of the Board of Equalization's Property Tax Abatement Work Group. I'm pleased to be joined by Board Member Vasquez, Antonia Vasquez, my fellow board member and colleague on this work group. And today is the first of at least 3 meetings that we will have scheduled that will come before this work group. Our next meeting will occur on August 31st, and our third meeting is scheduled for September 28th. And the purpose of the work group is to examine how property tax abatements could be used as a tool to incentivize and support the development of new housing. This is a particularly important topic for the so-called missing middle. Many of you are familiar with that term, that missing middle term. And these are the individuals who don't qualify for affordable housing because of their income, or they're not wealthy enough to easily enter into the marketplace as new homeowners. So we are all aware that this is often a very difficult and area to develop new housing. Often restrictive zoning doesn't allow for housing density, and the process for planning for the development of housing is also tenuous. Local governments impose development fees as part of the approval process, and we know that these fees are important, but they do in turn reduce the margin of profit necessary for developers to proceed. In April of this year, the National Association of Home Builders reported that building materials costs had risen 8% since January. Also, building material costs had risen over 20% year to year and had risen 33% since the start of the pandemic. So what I am aiming to do is to address the property tax abatements as a way of determining how and if property tax abatements could even be used as an incentive to reduce the cost of producing housing. So in doing our analysis, what we plan to do is to listen carefully about how revenue backfills could be created to address any reduction in property tax revenues that could impact our schools and our local governments. We will also carefully examine the importance of ensuring equity in development of housing and how the use of property tax abatements could be an important tool to advance an equity agenda. As the administrator of California's $85 billion property tax system, it's our collective goal to be proactive and to exercise the board's unique constitutional and statutory power to explore how the property tax system can be used to produce an important public good, more affordable housing, particularly for the missing middle. And at the conclusion of our meetings, and after hearing presentations from distinguished experts and stakeholders, we will issue a report on the work of the work group. I'd like to take an opportunity to acknowledge our policy partners. The Bay Area Council has been incredibly supportive, as has the Bay Area Council on Economic Institute. I'd like to also recognize my staff, as well as the staff from Mr. Vasquez's office. Everyone has been collectively important to bringing us to where we are today. The BOE staff also deserves accommodation. So everyone has been extremely helpful in providing guidance and advice, and they have significantly contributed to the research of this body of work. Jim Wonderman, I just want to call you out by name. He's the CEO of the Bay Area Council, and also Jeff Belisario, the Executive Director of the Bay Area Council Economic Institute. Thank you. I believe with us today we have Luis Mirante, the Vice President of Housing Policy. Mr. Mirante, could you just stand up or wave your hand so we can see who you are? Thank you. I appreciate your contributions as well. And please extend our appreciation to Mr. Wonderman and to Mr. Belisario for their partnership. As you can see from the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a lot to get through today. We've got some tight timelines that we're going to try to stick to. We have some of California's premier policy experts and distinguished individuals with real-world experience in developing housing here with us. So it is with great anticipation that we begin this journey. I'd like to turn to my colleague, Mr. Vasquez, for comments, and follow my fellow colleagues. We will hear from the Executive Director, Ms. Yvette Stowers. One more point, I just want to recognize my colleagues. We've got retired Senator Steve Gaines, we've got member Mike Schaefer, and all the way to my far right is Mr. Eppolite. He is representing Controller Betty Yee's office. So with that, I turn the mic over to you, Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to all, and welcome not only our board members, but many of our guests that we have here today. We are honored that you have agreed to join us today to address ways to spur the development of affordable housing, which is no doubt the most pressing challenge our state is facing right now. While the board's jurisdiction covers the property tax aspects of housing, we believe that property tax exemptions and other reduces assessment options can be extremely significant and worthwhile cost-saving incentives, not only for spurring more development, but also for protecting the financial stability of existing affordable housing stock. I would like to thank each of you for your time and effort because your presentation today is absolutely critical to help all of us understand what the needs are and how the property tax aspect can be the most effectively used. We appreciate your very busy schedule and truly value all your expertise and are willing to share with us with your and the public that's viewing today. I am hoping that we can come up with some creative ideas and ways, not only on the abatement side, but also on the tax credit side. For example, I know in Santa Monica, one of the challenges, which I believe is the same challenge, especially up in the Bay Area, is land costs is just so high that I'm just appalled to find out that some of the nonprofits, especially in my area, who I thought were doing a real good, well, they're doing a good job, but the cost per unit is up, anywhere from $600,000 to $700,000 a unit, which is just out of reach for many folks. And as a result of that, it's really been a challenge to develop what I consider true affordable housing. And I'm hoping that with your expertise from many of the speakers that are here today, and not only in the nonprofit world, but then folks that work for housing within the state of California, because I think we maybe need to do a better job too at the state level in terms of trying to streamline the process and minimizing some of these overhead and fees that we impose really on these developers. And I think those are some of the challenges. And I know with the leadership of our chair and many of you today, we're hoping we can come up with some creative ways and hopefully a whole new paradigm shift in figuring out this system, because, that we hear from the governor, it's like the major problem in the state of California. And there's every year that the demand only gets even worse. We're not even making headway in terms of developing more affordable units in the state of California. So we need to come up with a better roadmap to hopefully start chipping away at the supply that doesn't exist. Thank you, and thank you all for that.
Of course, thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to pivot to Ms. Stowers, and then we'll begin.
Good morning, Chair Cohen.
I think you need to make sure you turn your mic on.
Good morning. This one? Good morning. Good morning, Coach. Good morning, Chair Cohen and honorable members. I would like to first start by thanking the board for their leadership in exploring ways that the property tax system could be utilized to incentivize affordable housing in California. Thank you. Today's work group on property tax abatement will provide a valuable forum for public discussion with taxpayers, stakeholders, and state and local officials on this very complex issue. This is also a great opportunity for anyone to provide input and propose possible solutions and other ways we can work together to spur housing. As the BOE has oversight over our property tax system and co-administers the welfare exemption, we have a critical role in addressing this housing crisis. Finally, I also like to thank our esteemed group of presenters for taking the time out of your busy schedule to participate today. I am very much looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. All right, what I'd like to do now, Ms. Cicchetti, if you could call the next item, I appreciate it.
Excuse me, could I make
Oh.
some opening remarks? Would that
Of
be all right?
course. All right, Senator Gaines.
Great, thank you. I want to thank all of you for addressing California's need for increased affordable housing. As you likely know, when adjusted for the cost of living, California has the highest poverty rate in the nation. Our green energy plans and high taxes have made electricity and gasoline wildly expensive compared to the rest of the country. We have the highest state sales tax, the highest personal income tax in the nation, and our corporate income tax is the highest in the western states. I can't think of an area where our state is a bargain. But housing prices are the main driver of our poverty. We need more affordable housing. We need to build vastly more housing, period. We need to expand supply, possibly by millions of units in our state, to get price growth under control. Besides the issues we will address here today about affordable housing, California must reform CEQA so it can't be abused and turned into a project killer. In the 12 years that I served in the state legislature, even though there were many calls for reform of CEQA, it never happened. We need to look into capping or limiting building fees so that they reflect actual mitigation costs and are not merely ways to shake down developers or make projects more expensive. We should also look to simplify and speed up project approvals and eliminate downsizing of project approvals. Housing is not immune to supply and demand, and an explosion of home building is the only viable long-term solution to our housing affordable crisis. Depending on who you speak to, we are short $1 to $2 million housing units in the state of California. Our home builders play such a vital role in our state, and they could do even more in a collaborative effort with government. Thank you for coming forward today. I'm really looking forward to what you're going to present, the ideas that we can collaborate on and hopefully make housing more affordable to that, really to all elements of the housing segment, but to Chair Cohen's point, that middle that is getting squeezed, and there don't seem to be any benefits available for them. And I had the opportunity to speak to Ms. Castro Ramirez in reference to this homeless issue too, and how critical that is. And I'm hopeful with the governor's plans and the CASE project, where there's a different opportunity, a different pathway for the homeless, where they can get the support services and the housing. And they don't have a family, right? So how do you get a support system around a homeless individual that can't care for themselves and maybe is not even cognizant of making the right decisions in life? So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And that is Ted Gaines, not Steve Gaines, my apologies.
That's right.
Retired Senator Ted Gaines. Thank you for your remarks. Colleagues, do any of you others have any remarks? If not, all right. Let's go ahead and, Mr. Keddy.
The next item on today's Board Work Group agenda is item number 2, overview of the current housing crisis and development challenges of building market rate, missing middle and affordable housing in California, state education and think tank, developers, funders, and housing advocates' perspectives. Speakers for the state perspectives: Jason Elliott, Senior Housing Advisor, Governor Gavin Newsom; Lourdes M. Castro Ramirez, Secretary, California Housing and Community Development; Tina Johnson, Executive Director, California Housing Finance Agency. We also will have items from the Honorable Fiona Ma, Treasurer, State of California; the Honorable Scott Wiener, Senator, Chair, State Senate Housing Committee; and the Honorable Buffy Wicks, Assembly Member, Chair of the California Assembly on Housing and Community Development Committee, represented by Lisa Engel, Chief Consultant, California Assembly Housing and Community Development Committee.
Thank you. Okay.
Please come forward. I think they all.
I think everyone is here. I don't see, is
Yes.
Lisa Engel here? All right, she's not here just yet. So, Jason, Mr. Elliott, what I'd like to do is we'll start with you, and then when you finish, we're going to pivot and bring in Senator Wiener.
Okay.
And then we'll, Ms. Ramirez, then we'll go with you, and then we'll go with you, Ms. Johnson. All right? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. My name is Jason Elliott. I am Senior Counselor to Governor Gavin Newsom, and as was stated, housing is one of the issues that I spend most of my time on, and relatedly, homelessness as well. I really appreciate this convening, Madam Chair. I appreciate your leadership, commend your leadership for having this important discussion. I'm really excited to see the results of this work in a couple months' time, because the tax system as a potential boon to housing is, I think, an underexplored area of policy. And so I'm very much looking forward to hearing the dialogue and, most importantly, reading whatever report and results come from this process. So thank you for doing this. It's really important work. I'm not going to belabor the causes of the housing crisis. I think by virtue of us all being here in this room this morning, we're aware of how we got here, or of the fact that we are here. Underproduction over decades and decades. Underproduction, bad decision after bad decision in the state and in local governments, all of which accrue to the negative result of having simply not enough housing in this state. And my friend and colleague, Secretary Castro Ramirez, will talk a bit about what we believe the state's need is over the next 8 years, 2.5 million units, and how we arrive at that eye-poppingly large number. But let's also not, before we start talking about solutions, let's not set aside the fact that there has been exclusionary policies that have been at work in this state for many, many decades that have systematically limited the home ownership and upward mobility opportunities of Black, Latino, and other Californians of color. We have to start from an understanding that that is where we have been, but it doesn't mean that's where we have to go. But it is simply part of the story of why California's housing market is so unaffordable right now. And, if it's any solace, I don't know that it is, but if it's any solace, this is not a California problem. This is a national problem, perhaps most acutely experienced here in California. I was reading an article this morning about how people in Mexico City are tired of Americans moving there and taking their affordable housing. The same is true in Vancouver. So this is a national plague. We are suffering it perhaps more acutely than other places, but we are not alone in this. So I don't want to dwell too much on a sort of a history lesson about where we are. We've all sort of come to that place and understood that that's a problem. So where do we go? Governor Newsom's approach on these issues I'll touch on homelessness briefly because I think homelessness is the manifestation of acute housing crisis. Most people who fall into homelessness do so because of economic conditions. There are definitely underlying drug issues, definitely underlying mental health issues, but the difference between someone who is wealthy and mentally ill and someone who is destitute and mentally ill is the difference between housed and homeless. So let's also sort of acknowledge that. The homelessness agenda, which I won't dwell on too long here, it's a lot of money. It's $15 billion. But perhaps more important than the money are the streamlinings that come along with this. And Mr. Gaines, to speak to some of the comments you made in your opening remarks, a lot of our homelessness agenda is predicated on CEQA exemptions and land use streamlining and other sorts of streamlinings. Getting things up quickly, removing local land use barriers, and executing. That's a core component of the agenda. The money without the streamlinings I don't think would be as successful as we've been. 55,000 Californians just since the beginning of the pandemic brought off the streets and placed into shelter or housing. And I think those streamlinings are the secret ingredient in that success. So looking to replicate those and expand those, certainly to your comments, sir. On housing, which is the point of this convening and this task force, I would say that the core principle of the Newsom administration is production through accountability. More production, more production, more production. Let's not divide the pie in a different way. Let's not argue about who deserves more than someone else. We have to grow, bless you, we have to grow the pie. Production, production, production. As I said, my friend and colleague, Secretary Castro Ramirez, will talk a little bit about where we actually think we need to go in hard numbers. Total units. It's 2.5 million. That's a number that's been reported publicly. I just want to put 2.5 million in perspective because I think it frames up the challenge that we're all facing here. Depending on how you want to count it, there's about 15 million housing units, dwelling units in California. Maybe it's a little higher because there's some that are illegal or not known to local governments, but let's say it's 15 million. Let's say it's 16 million. If we're 2.5 million units short over the next 8 years, that means that 1 out of every 6 Californians who want to find a place to live over the next 8 years aren't going to be able to find one. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about being 17, 16, 15, 18% below where we need to be. That is catastrophic, right? That means that, well, there's 5 members of the board. If there was an additional member, that means 1 out of the 6 of your families wouldn't have a place to live in 8 years. That's what we're talking about. So just to put that in perspective, production, production, production. Everything we're doing on preservation of naturally occurring and subsidized affordable housing is critical, but it's not enough. Tenant protection is critical, and we're proud of the administration's record on tenant protection, but it's not enough. We also have to focus on production at all levels of income. And so as you embark on this work, I wasn't asked my perspective on tax abatement, so I won't share it. But one thing I will say is we all have to think about what the most cost-effective investments may be, because there are a lot of very good ideas. Carol, who I was talking to before, has got about 50 of them in her head. There are a lot of really good ideas about how to spur production in California. And the question is, with limited resources and limited political time and energy, what can we get accomplished? And the question that I'm eager to hear the board and the task force answer is, how does the tax structure measure up against other ways that we can incentivize production? We can build affordable housing units at $700,000 a pop with pure state general fund. I don't think anybody thinks that's a good idea, but it's a way. It's a thing we could do. It's a choice we could make, and then you can stack all the other choices against each other, and that's what I'm really eager to see, is how these things all measure up against each other. So I really again appreciate the invitation to engage with the board on this question, the fact that the question is being raised at all, and eager to continue to support the work over the next few months as you continue. So I was told to hand it to the secretary, but I'm not handing it to the secretary, Madam Chair. I believe I'm handing it back to you for Senator Wiener. Is that right?
Yeah, let me see
Okay.
if he's, we're going to go with the
Well,
secretary.
then, my friend and
Thank
colleague,
you.
Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez, thank you very much for your
Real
time.
quick, one question for you.
Of
You
course.
mentioned 2.5 million units needed. Is that in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, annually?
And I know that the secretary is going to speak to this. It's over the 6th cycle of the regional housing needs allocation.
Thank you.
So 8 years is a shorthand.
Got it,
So by 2030.
got it.
Yes.
By 2030.
All right.
What a, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the board for having this very important conversation. And I think Jason summarized at a very high level where the administration is at when it comes to ensuring that we're addressing housing insecurity, housing affordability, and really creating more resilient communities. Because at the end of the day, I think housing is about the platform that everyone needs to be able to thrive. And housing, of course, that is well integrated into a community, housing that is well connected to jobs, to education, to the amenities that families need to thrive is critically important. And so I start there because I want to ensure that as we have the conversation about housing, right, that we not forget that this is about families and people and communities. And so, again, thank you, Chair, for the invitation to present today. I'm Lourdes Castro Ramirez, and I'm not with the California Housing and Community Development Department, although it is one of the departments under our agency. I serve as the Secretary of the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency. The agency oversees financial and consumer protections, guards California's civil rights, licenses over 4 million professionals and businesses throughout the state. And we're also very focused on coordinating efforts to create quality, affordable homes for all. A home is a necessary foundation for a stable and thriving future. This is why we're strengthening the housing finance ecosystem, coordinating across state government with a focus on health and housing to prevent and end homelessness. We're also focused on removing development barriers to expand affordable and market rate housing. We're also building public, private, and philanthropic partnerships and deploying funds very quickly to accelerate rental and homeownership opportunities. As Jason mentioned, Governor Newsom and his administration has been laser-focused on tackling the significant housing and homelessness challenges facing our state. The high cost of housing is at the heart of the issue. Rents are rising faster than incomes, which puts more people at risk of homelessness. Renters need to earn almost 3 times the state minimum wage to afford the average asking rent in the state. This is an increase of 11% over last year. Production of affordable and market rate homes has also not kept up with demand, as Jason mentioned. And the recently released statewide housing plan, which was released through HCD, provides insight into the need and what we must do as we move forward. As Jason mentioned, the decades of underinvestment and undersupply has resulted in really the state falling behind in terms of unit production. In order for us to catch up, we must plan for 2.5 million new units over the course of the next 8 years, so essentially by 2030. At least 1 million of these homes must be affordable to lower-income households or families. And lower income is defined as households that are 80% of AMI or below. As an example, in LA County, a family of 4 with an annual household income of about $95,000 would qualify for affordable housing. In San Francisco, a family of 4 would qualify with a household income of about $149,000 or less. We also know that both renters and homeowners are experiencing high cost burden. Cost burden households spend 30% or more of their income on rent and utilities, leaving very little for other expenses like food, healthcare, education, and of course emergencies. Black, Indigenous, and people of color are more likely to be cost burdened by high rent prices. For example, nearly 2/3 of Black households are cost burdened, compared to under half of white households. And finally, federal rental assistance in the form of housing vouchers is reaching less than 1 in every 5 eligible low-income households in need. Again, the statewide housing plan provides more data to help us understand the magnitude of the issue, but also it lays the path for how we're meeting this challenge. Decades of underinvestment, decades of undersupply has created, this situation that we're in. But I'm pleased to share, as Jason mentioned, that under the leadership of Governor Newsom and this administration, we have stepped up with a number of policies, innovative programs, and funding to match the scale of the challenge. And critical to this success has been the support and the leadership of the legislature. This year, the governor and the legislature committed $10.2 billion to affordable housing development. This investment will bring us closer to meeting the statewide demand for affordable housing, but much more is needed. Just about a month ago, President Biden released the Housing Supply Action Plan, which also at the federal level calls attention to more production. And couldn't agree more with Jason. It is about producing more units, but also ensuring that as we produce more units, that we're producing more units that are affordable to some of the lowest income households across our state. Beyond that, we're working to make sure that every city and county is accelerating and removing barriers to housing production. At the Department of Housing and Community Development, we stood up the Housing Accountability Unit to provide technical assistance to jurisdictions when needed, but also to lead enforcement actions to support the implementation of state housing laws. Let me now just provide a quick overview of some of the strategies and the comprehensive approach that the state is taking to ensure that we're addressing housing stability, housing supply, and building resilient, inclusive communities. We know that it is more cost-effective, pragmatic, and proactive to prevent someone from losing their home and plunging into homelessness. To that end, we stood up the nation's largest emergency rental relief program, along with the strongest eviction protections, delivering support and relief to the state's most vulnerable renter households. We partner with landlords and engaged over 120 community-based organizations to increase awareness, access, and assistance. The program has thus far provided $4.1 billion in rent and utility assistance to prevent the eviction and to keep about 344,000 families housed. And I also will mention that of the 344,000 families that have been kept housed, about 85% were low-income families making below 50% of AMI. We're also working with homeowners and lenders to prevent foreclosures by covering missed mortgage payments and property tax debt through the California Mortgage Relief Program with funds from U.S. Treasury. So far, CalHFA, under the leadership of Tina Johnson Hall, has distributed over $100 million to about 3,200 homeowners in our state. And on homelessness, we're taking action to target this crisis and with a sense of urgency, a sense of compassion, and a sense of care. Our goal is to end homelessness by making homelessness episodes rare, brief, and non-reoccurring, and by also implementing innovative solutions. Programs like HomeKey, the governor's signature program that has earned national recognition as a best practice. HomeKey provides funding to local communities to purchase and to convert hotels, office space, commercial buildings into affordable housing units for people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. In less than 2 years, we have funded 10,000 HomeKey units, 10,000 in less than 2 years. And these are units that are in every region of the state, with strong partnership between the state and local government. And I'm really proud of the level of capacity that has been built at the local level because I agree with Jason, it's not just about dollars and the sort of regulatory expediency that is necessary to get these dollars to use, but it's also about building capacity at the local level and to ensure that those dollars are being leveraged and being put to good use. HomeKey is one strategy in a more comprehensive effort. After 4 years of state interagency work to respond to homelessness, we also have evolved the state system just past January with the introduction of the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. The council brings together nearly 20 state departments and agencies under a health and housing framework to address homelessness. I'm pleased to co-chair this council along with my colleague, Secretary Galley, who heads up the Health and Human Services Agency. The council oversees California's first ever statewide action plan to prevent and end homelessness, which also embeds equity and shared accountability across state departments with local partners and tracks progress. The council requires cities, counties, and continuums to care, the continuums of care, to submit local homelessness action plans, to measure and to create stronger regional coordination, because as we know, homelessness does not stop at city boundaries. Our work to end homelessness and our efforts to create housing are closely linked. And then finally, just to kind of wrap up in terms of our overall approach, the administration has established guiding principles to better align the affordable housing finance system. These principles include creating deeply affordable housing while continuing to emphasize cost efficiency, aligning policy and funding cycles across state agencies, reducing barriers for new and historically excluded developers, and promoting fair housing. I want to just take an opportunity to thank Treasurer Ma and Controller Betty Yee for their leadership and partnership. Together, we have been working to develop a more predictable set of regulations to enable developers to have a level of certainty when they're developing. And we've also worked together to create greater access and increase housing in high-resource areas closer to amenities like schools, green spaces, and jobs to improve the quality of life for all Californians, and also to address, of course, climate change. Last week, Governor Newsom called for a bold new target of 3 million climate-ready homes by 2030. This will help Californians live in safe, stable housing while helping us to achieve our climate goals through new construction and also by retrofitting existing homes. I'm also very excited about the investments that we're making to repurpose underutilized buildings and also publicly owned property and converting that into affordable housing. And we're continuing to work with our team across HCD, CalHFA, and other departments to identify opportunities to streamline efforts. Specifically, this year, HCD combined 4 different funding programs into one super notice of funding availability with about $650 million. After receiving input from developers, we created this streamlined one-stop application to speed up the construction of housing units. And we've also established a set-aside for emerging and community-based developers to build capacity within the real estate development industry. In closing, we're focused on affordable housing, we're focused on building strong communities, and we're focused on continuing to remove barriers to the overall production of housing, and that includes market rate housing, affordable housing, and also creative programs like the investment that we're making to expand the ADU, accessory dwelling unit initiative. I've provided a very quick snapshot of the holistic approach that we're taking to address these housing challenges across the state. I look forward to continuing to stay in dialogue with this board. Very much appreciate the fact that you're looking at how to leverage the property tax system to support the work that we're doing. And now I'll turn it back over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation, very thoughtful and very thorough. Do you have any parting thoughts about tax abatement, about what the discussion that we're having today as it relates to your understanding of housing across the entire state of California? Is this a real thing, or are we chasing a pipe dream?
Chair, I think it is important to look at what the state is doing and what's working, and to ensure that changes or incentives or programs that are being contemplated align to the areas of priority. And so that would be my sort of recommendation, just to ensure that we're continuing to stay sort of in alignment as we address, from the state's perspective, it is about ensuring that we're keeping families in their homes, but that we're also producing more housing, and producing more housing that gets, to increasing the supply of extremely low and very low-income units.
So would you agree that this is a step in the right direction when you say making sure that we're talking to each other?
Yes, yes, definitely.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Vasquez has a quick question, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, thank you first for your presentation. I know it was kind of an overview and a kind of a snapshot of the state of California, but I was wondering, basically, I'm kind of looking at you as the Secretary of HUD for California, basically on housing, right? What can we do at the state level to minimize some of the obstacles that some of these nonprofits are going through? Because I'm hearing from nonprofits that, the state's not doing such a good job of putting them through so much in terms of fees and commissions for approvals that in many cases, they just walk away from it.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree that when you have not made something a priority and you shift to making it a priority, all the systems and the structures need to align to ensuring that we're all rowing in that direction. And I will assure you that we're very focused on making sure that within the programs that we administer, that we're looking at ways to consolidate. We're looking at ways to be more transparent. We're looking at ways to align the various funding cycles, because it is unfair for a developer who's looking to create 100 units, 150 units of affordable housing to have to go through 5, 6, 7 different application processes. And we're focused on that. The Supernova that was released this year was one step in that direction, consolidating 4 programs. I will also say is that we're also making ourselves at leadership, myself, the director, the team, we're going out into community and having conversations with the affordable housing development community, particularly with emerging and smaller developers. I was in Compton 2 months ago with about 30 different smaller community-based developers that are doing 2 units, 4 units, and that are really working on their capacity. So we're very committed to also creating greater access and a stronger relationship with a very diverse group of developers.
May I add something onto what the Secretary said, if that's okay, Mr. Vasquez?
Sure.
We could, everything Lourdes said is, of course, spot on. We could develop the perfect funding program in California, at the state. We could perfect every mechanism, we could perfect every NOFA, we could administer every fund perfectly. And it wouldn't solve our problem, because most of housing decisions are made locally in this state. So while the Secretary is absolutely right, we need to do a lot better job about getting our ducks in a row across TCAC, CIDLAC, the administration, all the various funding streams and sources. We do. Perhaps more importantly, I guess that can be argued, perhaps more importantly, local governments need to step up and fulfill their legal responsibility to build housing. Because whether it's an affordable housing funding stream coming out of HCD, or whether it's a tax abatement program that is in California's future, at the end of the day, what I mentioned in my remarks earlier was that there's a history of exclusionary zoning and anti-affordable housing in a lot of places in this state. We have hundreds of jurisdictions in California that are out of compliance with a variety of housing laws. So, as I said, if we perfect all of our programs that exist now, or we design a perfect program, that still won't solve the housing crisis until we unlock the NIMBY problem that we have in this state. And that's a huge part of the Newsom administration's approach to meeting our housing goals, not only the 2.5 million goal overall, but most importantly, perhaps the 1 million affordable units within that. There's a whole other conversation we can have about the Housing Accountability Unit, which the Secretary mentioned, some of the lawsuits that have been filed, our partnership with Attorney General Bonta, which is tremendous and strong and a breath of fresh air. There's a whole lot that can be said about that, and I don't want to go off agenda too much, but I just want to make the point that the nonprofits and the local developers that you're hearing from, sir, we hear from them too, and our response is, even if we did it perfectly, which we are not, but even if we did it perfectly, that's not the whole ballgame. There's a local accountability layer that needs to be considered very seriously as well.
I agree with you. As a former mayor of a city in Santa Monica, it was really heart-wrenching to see some of these other beach cities that weren't doing half of what we were doing, and yet they were actually making things worse every year for us because the housing crisis just grew. But, along those lines, when you talk about NIMBYism, what can we do as a state, like the governor, I don't know what the relationship he has on the federal level, but there's a lot of federal properties that are underutilized, like the VA properties. For example, you talk about NIMBYism.
Yeah.
We need to do a better example ourselves as a government, because there's a VA property in Westwood that's surrounded by some very high-end real estate.
I have visited that Westwood property with
And
the
it's
governor of
very
California twice.
underutilized, right?
Yes, it is, you're right.
Very underutilized. And we need to set a better example, and we're not.
Yeah, I agree. I will add that it's not only federal property, it's state property. It's not only state property, it's local and school district property.
And you're right, not
Yeah.
one of them is going to solve the problem, but I think all of these collectively could make a huge dent.
And at the end of the day, holding local governments legally accountable when they don't fulfill their legal
I agree with you.
requirements.
All right, just in the, we gotta
Yes,
keep-
ma'am.
we gotta
I know, we
keep-
gotta-
keep
I yield. Yes,
going.
ma'am. I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
So, but this is great. I love the spirit. Senator Gaines has a question, and then once he makes his question, and Ms. Johnson, we're going to bring in Senator Weiner, and then we'll pivot to your presentation, okay? All right.
Great, wonderful. Yeah, to Secretary Castro Ramirez. Also to you, Jason Elliott. I would just like your thoughts on ownership. Because in a democratic republic like we have here in America, I think the ability to create wealth is really, I think the easiest way is through home ownership. So if we can provide the right product that's at the right price point where people can get in, that's how I see us. I mean, a lot of people can advance from poverty to the middle class through home ownership. And so is that, I'm just wondering do you share that philosophy in terms of home ownership and the importance? I think for our society, it's important too.
Definitely, just my own sort of personal story, right? But we are, very focused also on increasing the homeownership rate. Homeownership is more than just having a home. It's having a sense of stability, a sense of belonging, and it's also an opportunity to build wealth for your
Yes,
family
yeah.
and for, to pass on, right, to your family. Executive Director Tina Johnson Hall will probably touch upon this a little more detail. The governor and the legislature just approved through this budget $500 million to be able to implement the Dream for All homeownership program. But beyond that, we have a number of homeownership programs that are designed to assist potential homeowners with financial literacy and preparing to be homeowners, but also funding for down payment assistance and overall sort of support, because we want to ensure that once a family becomes a homeowner, that they're able to stay homeowners for life. But Executive Director Tina Johnson Hall can go into more detail.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to be fast, I promise. I'm going to be a broken record here, Senator, but if, to stipulate and agree with your point that homeownership is a path out of poverty, then we have to provide opportunities for homeownership. And in California, I have to check my statistics, but I think black wealth is 60% of white wealth. We are not producing enough units that people can buy, that then they can have that path. And it just comes back to the place of production to increase supply, because
Right.
I agree completely, and the governor agrees completely with homeownership as a path out of
Right,
poverty.
right.
But then that's our responsibility collectively
Yes.
to create those homes.
Yeah,
And we
and
have not done that over the
If you
last
look
number of years.
at the numbers for black ownership of homes through the Great Recession, it
Mm-hmm.
declined, I think, about 8 or 10 points, which is dramatic. And so how do you get that back?
Right.
And I think we're addressing a lot of those issues, and I'm sure Tina Johnson will tell us more.
All right, with that said, let's go ahead and bring in another leader in this space, in this discussion. We've got Senator Scott Weiner that's going to be joining us via the Teams platform. To my IT team, could we bring him in? Senator Weiner, good to see you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us
morning,
today.
Madam Chair.
All right, I'll give you the platform. The mic is yours.
I'm sure it's good to be here.
Can we turn up
for those who
the,
don't-
real quick, can we turn up the volume so we can hear in this chamber? Okay, as we work through the volume, Senator Weiner, please continue.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, it's a little bit better. Just, please continue.
Do you want to wait to fix that, or?
It's fixing as you speak. All right, I'm getting a thumbs up. They can hear you.
Okay, now you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair, and for those who don't know, the Chair and I were sworn into the San Francisco Board of Supervisors on the same day in January of 2011. So it's been a long journey, and Mr. Gaines, good to see you again, my former colleague. So thank you for having me today, and thank you for tackling this incredibly important topic. And tax policy, of course, is important, and I'm glad there are discussions happening around tax abatements, because that can be a powerful policy tool if it's implemented in a thoughtful and targeted way. Of course, there are other tax policies. People don't like to talk about it, but Prop 13 was one of the most destructive things that could happen for housing, because it gave cities a massive incentive to favor commercial development over residential, because of the drastic cap on all property taxes. And so cities now have a huge incentive to favor development that's going to create sales tax or hotel tax or parking tax or whatever. So tax policy is important, but I do just want to say I fully agree with Mr. Elliott that even with strong tax incentives and strong funding around affordable housing, those are all really important. But if you can't, if you're not zoning for and approving housing in an expeditious way, it's inherently limited. And even with all the change, we've had a lot over the last 6-7 years in the legislature. We've made some real strides around housing, strengthening the Housing Accountability Act, strengthening the state housing density bonus, strengthening our ADU requirements, passing various housing streamlining bills, starting on the road of zoning reform with SB 9 and 10. There's a lot more work to do legislatively, but I really do agree with Mr. Elliott that we have to also aggressively, consistently, and proactively enforce the laws that we have, because although there are cities that are in good faith working to comply with state housing law, even if they disagree with those laws, they're doing their job and complying with the law. So I'm not in any way broad brushing about cities. There are cities that are working very hard to comply. Unfortunately, there are other cities that are not and have sort of shrugged their shoulders and don't seem to care. And some of those we are known examples of cities that have engaged in bad faith behavior. The city of Cupertino is one of them, around the Valco shopping center redevelopment, a completely dead mall that's going to be converted into 2,400 units of housing, half of which will be affordable for lower income residents. And the city of Cupertino just, I think, probably spends about 12 hours a day figuring out ways to put gum in the works for that project. Or the city of Woodside that tried to declare itself mountain lion protected habitat in order to exempt itself from state law, as if a duplex was more harmful to a mountain lion than a single family home. The city of Pasadena that was making moves to declare the entire city a historic district. And for both Woodside and Pasadena, I want to thank the Attorney General for quickly warning them that they were violating the law, and they did back down. But there are also bigger cities that engage in this behavior, including my own city of San Francisco, which is, I think, in my view, brazenly violating the law and should be sued by the state. We've seen the Board of Supervisors illegally reject projects like the Stevenson Street project, which is proposing 500 units, 20% affordable on a parking lot a block from a BART station, and the Board of Supervisors illegally rejected it. The board has illegally rejected other projects as well, and HCD did send a letter to San Francisco saying we think that these violated the law, and by the way, your entire system of how you approve housing is designed to sabotage housing and could be a violation of state law. So I am encouraging HCD and the Attorney General not to stop with a letter, but to really hold San Francisco accountable. The city of Santa Monica, which has a history as well, and most recently there's a proposal in Santa Monica to mandate for projects that aren't 100% affordable, not just prevailing wage, which I support, but up to 2.5 times prevailing wage for different projects, which is the same way of saying it will be impossible financially for those projects to get built. If Santa Monica adopts that, and I hope they don't, that I think would be a pretty significant violation of state law. So we see this in larger cities and smaller cities, and I think we all have to look in the mirror about our own cities in terms of how they are acting. Fortunately, there are cities that are trying to move in the other direction. The city of Los Angeles has been doing some good work, and LA has really tough politics around housing, but LA has been working hard to adopt what I think is a solid housing element. And there were some deficiencies that are being corrected, but I want to really commend the city of Los Angeles for trying. As the largest city in the state with incredibly complicated politics, but they really are working hard to try to do what they need to do to zone for and prepare for enough housing. And I think when we talk about housing, we talk a lot about housing elements and density bonuses and CEQA and all this technical talk, and we have to boil it down to the actual human costs. When we allow NIMBYs to control what's happening in our cities, because they're worried about the quote unquote character of their neighborhood changing, or parking might be a little harder, or there might be a building that's a few stories taller than the other buildings and they think it's out of place, or there might be more kids in their child's classroom. What they're doing is pushing people into poverty and homelessness. For 50 years, California has had a de facto policy of deprioritizing housing. We used to build hundreds of thousands of units a year in the 50s and the 60s to keep up with growth. And then we stopped starting in the 1970s. And now we have a multi-million home shortage. We rank 49 out of 50 states in homes per capita. And what that means is that so many Californians are living in poverty because of the cost of housing, that in order to have housing, they have to pay 50 or 70% of their income to housing, or they're living in overcrowded housing conditions, which makes it harder for their kids to do homework. Even if they're learning remotely, it makes it impossible when you have so many people crowded together. Of course, it's not healthy, as we learned during COVID, for people to be living packed together in overcrowded housing. And we have people who are living far away from where they work and have to do long commutes, which undermines our climate goals. The good news is that we know what we need to do. The legislature has been moving in that direction, although I think we need to do more and move faster. And we have more and more cities that are trying to do the right thing, and we have more and more local elected officials, city council members and mayors, who are running on a pro-housing platform and winning. And some cities with a bad history now have a majority pro-housing city council. So I'm optimistic, but there's a lot more work to do politically. The one thing I want to close with is the cost of building housing has really skyrocketed, which is its own problem. Part of that is the process. When it takes, on average, 4 or 5 years to get housing approved that is zoned for. So if someone comes forward and says, okay, you zoned for 5 stories at this density with these setbacks, and I want to build a project that complies with all your rules, and it still takes 4 years to get that project approved, that is a huge cost. And I look at, even 100% affordable housing in San Francisco. There's a great project in the Sunset, which has almost no affordable housing. That is a wonderful project. It's being jacked up and it's taking longer to get approved than it should be. And so that costs money and makes everything more expensive. In addition, materials have increased. The cost has increased dramatically. That was true before the pandemic, and it's really true now. And so that is an ongoing issue, and anything we can do to reduce the cost of building housing is going to be very beneficial. So again, thank you for having me today, and thank you for taking up this important topic.
Perfect. Senator Wiener, just wanted to acknowledge that we've got Jason Elliott from the governor's office with us. We've got Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez, and we also have Tina Johnson Hall from the
And
California.
I will just say, I want to thank the administration and the Attorney General for really prioritizing enforcement. Because once, as you know, once we pass a law, it's only step one. We have to enforce it. And I think the creation of the accountability unit and HCD, as well as the Attorney General's work, has been really helpful. I will say I just want to encourage the administration and the Attorney General to, not that you are letting things drop, but not to let things drop and to file lawsuits. I mentioned suing San Francisco, which I think is overdue, but I think, unfortunately, lawsuits are sometimes the only way to have true accountability.
Powerful words.
We appreciate Senator Wiener always reminding us of that on a regular basis as well. Thank you, sir.
And including my own city. I always hold my own.
Yes, sir.
city.
Absolutely. I love that's powerful words coming from the senator that represents San Francisco. Thank you, Mr. Elliott. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Madam
Of
Chair.
course.
Thanks, members.
Senator Wiener, I'm really grateful for you making time during your recess to come and join and share some of this wisdom with us. It's been invaluable. Let me see if my colleagues have any questions for you. Do you have anything for the senator?
I just,
This is Senator
yeah,
Gaines.
I want to thank Senator Wiener, because you were an advocate years ago when I was in the Senate with you, and you have just continued down that path. So appreciate the efforts that you're making so that people can get housing, can hopefully buy a home and create wealth for their family long term. So thank you.
Perfect. Also, the work that you're doing also, I wanted to just echo what Senator Gaines said, and not only you're an advocate for housing, but also paying intricate detail to the different layers, right? You think about the aging LGBTQ community. You think about transitional age youth housing. You think about the African American and Latino housing, folks that have historically been out and have had been locked out or have had challenges of getting access to capital. So you've been definitely a consistent champion on all of those fronts. Senator, Mr. Schaefer has something he'd like to add.
I just want to thank you, Mike Schaefer here. I've run into you a number of times. You've been down to San Diego. I am a big fan of the work you're doing in the legislature, and I'm happy to have this chance to hear you today. You had some very important points.
Thank you.
All right, we've got Mr. Vasquez.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Senator, for your thoughts and your ideas, and actually your leadership on this issue. And, like you mentioned, you represent San Francisco. I also represent Santa Monica, which are the two cities that I think have been doing a great job over the years. But sometimes you get, a change in leadership, and you get some of these crazy ideas where people are trying to stop the housing production. So I agree with you on that. And I was just wondering, moving forward, you kind of hit on something, and I don't know if it's something that we can do through maybe your leadership on the Housing Committee, like that would come up with some kind of maybe constitutional amendment that would maybe give it a little bit more teeth. So when we have some of these cities that in the past have been very active and very aggressive on housing, don't waver and start, because of change in leadership, all of a sudden try to take us backwards.
Well, I think actually, and I appreciate that, I think that right now the state actually does have teeth. Our ability to have state laws with teeth, we have. As you may know, there are people who are trying to qualify a constitutional amendment to kick the state out of housing entirely and to eliminate all state housing authority, which would be a disaster in terms of just housing overall and climate policy and fair housing and so forth. And we'll see if that qualifies for the ballot. But right now, the court rulings have been very solid in terms of the state having the authority to set strong state standards. So I think right now we need the legislature to continue to take bold action, but I also, one thing I've learned over time is that, it's always going to be the cities that are implementing these laws. And you can have cities that we have, with SB 35, which was the first bill I ever introduced, that it streamlines housing approvals. There are cities, there are times when someone will file an SB 35 application in the city with a history of NIMBYism, and they'll just say, great, we don't have to, we accept your application, go forth and build, and the cities that just really, really accept that law. There are other cities do everything in their power to sabotage it. And so we work very hard to close loopholes in laws. Some of these cities are ingenious at finding loopholes. And so for our ADU laws, we've probably passed 10 ADU bills in the last 5 years to close loopholes. We've had to pass multiple SB 35 loophole closure bills, and that's okay, we can do that. But boy, it makes it a lot easier when you have city staff and city councils that say, okay, we may or may not agree with this law, but that's the law and we're going to apply it. And so that's why the organizing at the local level is so important.
All right. Thank you, Senator Weiner. We appreciate your time. We're going to continue moving forward with our next presenter, Ms. Tina Johnson Hall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Cohen, and to the other members of the board for.
I think you need to make sure your mic is on or speak into it.
Okay, I'll try.
Is your green light on?
No, yeah.
Okay.
You could just speak, yeah.
Speak.
I can speak louder.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you, Chair Cohen, for the invitation today. And thank you to Secretary Lourdes for including me as part of her wonderful housing team. I'm going to hopefully share, we're practitioners. That's what we do at CalHFA. So for those of you, by way of background, CalHFA was established in 1975, and we were chartered very specifically as the state's affordable housing lender with two distinct divisions, single-family and multifamily. Our programs are designed to serve both low and moderate income folks, and in general, our AMI targets can range at low levels all the way up to 150% of AMI, depending upon the program. For the most part, our operations are self-supported. We raise funds through bond issuance, capital funds, and fees generated from our lending products. However, in the past 4 years, and thanks to the governor's leadership as well as support of the legislator, we have received a tremendous amount of both federal and local state funds that we administer on behalf of the state of California, which has helped us to evolve our programs even further through a social equity lens that we believe not only helps us to better house vulnerable populations, but spur opportunities to create generational wealth, and at the same time, create a fiscal sustainable options where we can put money back into the state and therefore back into the hands of vulnerable populations and developers who do this work. We were asked to, Senator Gaines brought up the area of home ownership, so I'm going to focus on home ownership. CalHFA currently runs a very successful down payment and closing cost assistance program called My Home, which serves first-time home buyers that make up to 150% of area median income. We have one of the largest programs in the country. We have one of the most diverse programs in the country, and we're able to hit populations in ways that not even my former conventional brethren can do. They're very jealous of us, and I like that. So through this program, just last year, we were able to help over 5,600 Californians buy their first home. That's very good, I would say. And then last year, CalHFA got a funding allocation through the state budget to create a program that provides even greater assistance for lower income homebuyers. This program is called the Forgivable Equity Builder Loan Program. I call it the game changer. So effectively what this does is it provides low-income housing homebuyer assistance up to 10% of the purchase price, and it's a grant. And so effectively it is forgiven after 5 years. That's the generational wealth that you're talking about. But we're going to take it even further this year. So this program not only created the general wealth, but it also served to change some of the historical disadvantage challenges in real estate that Californians have experienced for over 100 years. Just that one program. But we're now the next level. The next level, some of you may have heard about the California Dream for All. And Secretary Lourdes mentioned this is a $500 million investment that the legislature and the administration put into the most recent state budget. Now, what this does, and what we will be doing, we will be tasked with designing a new home buyer assistance program where we're going to push out funds to potential new home buyers, and we're going to provide 20% down to purchase a first home. Now, the difference in this particular program is that it has a shared appreciation function. That has not been done in the state of California at the scale that we're doing it. It just hasn't been done. And what will happen is when those home buyers sell their homes, we'll take a portion of that back and put it into a fund, and then those funds will be recycled for future home buyers. Now, this speaks to solutions and how, as practitioners, we're going to change the challenges of housing in the state of California. New products, that's what I'm talking about. Innovation, recycling old things and making them brand new. Collaboration, which is what we've all been talking about. And most importantly, flexibility, talking to each other. And talking outside our states, erasing the silos so that we can build a better product for the people who need us most. And not only have we decided, with Secretary Lourdes's express permission and guidance, we're not just leaving it for us to decide. We're going and talking to other California HFAs and seeing what works best for them and trying to bring that back. That is a marketable change that I think will open us up to new and innovative ideas which can really go to addressing some of the challenges that we mentioned. And the challenges are real. We mentioned some of them today. We mentioned the cost. We mentioned land supply. We mentioned entitlements and the process for building here in California. But by expanding the circle of folks that we work with, and kudos to you, Chair Cohen, as well as the other members of the Board of Equalization, so that we're opening up ourselves up to doing it differently, building a better mousetrap with the innovative tools that we all have. So I'm delighted to be here. I've been in the industry for now over 25 years. I've seen all the different real estate cycles that you can think of, and I'm probably more optimistic now than I have ever been. The funding makes it possible. The collaboration makes it probable. Thank you.
Thank you. That's what a powerful note to finish on. Thank you for that breath of fresh air. Quickly going to check with my colleagues. Any follow-up questions? None on this side? Okay, Senator Gaines has some for you.
Oh, I just want to thank you. That was exactly what I was looking for, so I appreciate I mean, those are real numbers in terms of your progress, and this program with the 20% down payment, proportional ownership. I'm familiar with it because the city of Roseville has been using that, and so to see that go statewide, though, is very encouraging. So thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your expertise, and it actually does bring a little bit of comfort. So we are moving down, we are having the appropriate conversation at the appropriate time. Thank you. We have a video that the Honorable Fiona Ma, our State Treasurer, has contributed to this discussion. She wasn't able to be here today, but she's got a 5-minute clip that I'd like to play at this time. And then, are you heading out?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I
you.
appreciate your
Thank you
time.
so much.
Thank you. We'll follow up with you directly. Ms. Johnson Hall, too, if you need to pass. Thank you. All right, please play the video for the treasurer.
Good morning, everyone. This is California State Treasurer Fiona Ma, and I'm happy to join California State Board of Equalization's work group event on property tax abatement and affordable housing. Apologies for missing you live. When you see this recording, I will likely be touring a recycled paperboard mill in Quebec, Canada, with the California Foundation for the Environment and the Economy. Special thanks to board member Malia Cohen for inviting me to speak to you today. I am thrilled to see that the BOE and Malia Cohen are thinking about innovative and exciting strategies to produce and finance affordable housing, like through property tax abatement. If we're going to be successful at ending our housing crisis, we need to be utilizing, or at least discussing and debating, innovative approaches like this. So thanks again to the BOE for hosting such a critically important event, and to my co-speakers during this portion, California State Senator Scott Wiener, California Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, Jason Elliott from the governor's office. Many folks I encounter outside government and the housing world do not realize that the state treasurer plays an important role in affordable housing. I chair 16 boards, commissions, authorities that finance a wide array of projects, but 2 in particular are involved in the affordable housing finance process. The first, the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, TCAC, that awards hundreds of millions of dollars in state and federal low-income housing tax credits for affordable housing. And 2, the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, or CDLAC, which also finances affordable housing through the award of tax-exempt private activity bonds. Through TCAC and CDLAC, we work tirelessly at the Treasurer's Office to provide the financial resources to support the construction, rehabilitation, and preservation of affordable multifamily construction. But we must do more than just building and maintaining affordable housing if we want to move the needle for Californians. For example, in addition to a housing supply problem, we also face a home ownership problem. With incomes that fail to keep up with the cost of housing, with housing costs that have increased almost 40% in the past 4 years, home ownership doesn't seem like an achievable part of the California dream for too many in our Golden State. The unfortunate reality is that the rate of appreciation of home prices is outpacing the rate at which younger families and the first-time buyers can accumulate a down payment. So, just like the spirit of this work group, I'd like to share with you how the State Treasurer's Office is also thinking outside the box to come up with innovative solutions to this aspect of our housing crisis. You may have recently heard about a new home ownership program called California Dream for All. This program uses a shared appreciation model to make home ownership and the creation of generational wealth possible for thousands of Californians. Over the last few months, California Forward, in consultation with our office and key stakeholders, spearheaded the design and development of the California Dream for All program framework. We recently tendered our report to the legislative leadership and are so thrilled to report that Cal HFA has received an allocation of $500 million to operate this program. To be clear, the program is not another housing subsidy program, but rather a way for the state to invest in a revolving investment fund that supports down payment assistance products for home buyers. Unlike the unwise lending practices that led up to the bursting of the housing bubble in 2007, this program reinforces sound lending practices through the state's sharing of equity in the consumer's home purchase, rather than resorting to financial gimmickry to promote home ownership. Even better, the value created through appreciation will help future new homeowners in California for decades to come. The California Dream for All program will also create an equity-focused, scalable model for the rest of the country. As we frequently do, California is continuing to lead the country with progressive and creative policy solutions to society's most vexing problems, and I'm so proud to have played an important role in this process. As you participate in today's conversations, I hope that participants bring the same approach we utilized in developing California Dream for All to the working group. Please think creatively about how to solve our housing challenges. Property tax abatement tools represent an interesting approach that I hope participants can debate in earnest. Thank you again to Board Member Malia Cohen and the entire California State Board of Equalization for inviting me to this important workshop, and best wishes for a successful work group.
Thank you very much, Treasurer Ma. We appreciate those remarks. Before we go on to our next panel, is Lisa Engel here? Did she make it? No? Not a problem. All right, we are going to keep moving. It is 11:30. Our next group of speakers are going to be speaking about education and speaking from the education and think tank perspective. Ms. Cicchetti, could you please announce them?
Yes. The speakers for the education and think tank perspective are Ms. Carol Galante, founder and advisor, Turner Center for Housing and Innovation, University of California, Berkeley, and the Housing Lab. Dr. Jason Ward, PhD, Associate Director, RAND Center for Housing and Homelessness in Los Angeles. Please come forward.
All right, thank you. Ms. Galante, thank you for joining us, and Dr. Ward, I appreciate your time as well. I'll turn the mics over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair Cohen and members of the board. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to speak to this important issue. I have a few slides, but I'm going to hold them because a number of the things that I addressed on the slide have been addressed already, and I really want to drill down on a couple of important points. And I may just ask for one or two as I go along here. But you heard Jason Elliott speak about, the housing affordability crisis isn't new. It's been around for decades. I would say, however, that old Oldsmobile commercial, we are not in our fathers' or grandfathers' housing crisis. We are in a new form of a housing crisis that, frankly, has not really been the same level of problem that we had in the 1970s or the 1980s. It has grown in an entirely different way that I want to talk about what's happened in the 70s that made what was, some level of housing affordability a challenge, even more of a challenge going forward, and why the kind of tools that you're talking about are particularly important given the state of the housing crisis in California. And I also want to echo something that Jason said at the very beginning and not lose track of this, that advancing equity and climate change goals while we're solving the housing problem, they're totally intertwined because, part of our father and grandfathers' housing crisis is still with us, and that is really the equity agenda, where Black and Latino and other families were left out of the wealth building in home ownership through actions of the federal government, state government, and local governments, and we need to rectify that. And I know the state is very focused on that. So I want to just mention three issues and drill down on two of them. So the first clearly is the housing supply and demand problem that you all have talked about. We simply have not kept up our housing supply with our population growth. Our population in 1950 for the state of California was about 10 million people. It's now 40 million people, give or take. We've lost a few in the past pandemic years here. But but the housing supply, at its height, we were producing somewhere around 200,000 homes a year. We haven't come close in decades of, building 200,000 homes a year. We reached probably the height, big bursts, then some recessions, probably the big height in the 70s, including in multifamily. And then a lot of things changed, which I can talk about. That's issue number one, supply, demand, more people, more jobs, not enough housing. what happens is people who have more money outbid the people who don't have as much money for the available housing stock. And that about sums it up. But then we get to the cost of what we build and the cost of what we build. And here, I do want to show the second slide in my deck there, if you could bring that up. What we built in 1947, if you go to the next slide, yeah. What we built in 1947 as a home basically was a 1,500 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, maybe a garage, okay? Go to the next one. There we go. Okay, so that entry-level home that was built in 1947 was probably purchased, by someone who lived on the peninsula for $25,000, okay? If you were in Akron, Ohio, it might have been $10,000. So yeah, it was a little bit more in California, but it was not appreciably more. It was what we built. That home today, we would have sold for $185,000 in today's dollars. So a home that we're building today costs over $1 million, single-family home. Now, what's in that home? It's probably 2 or 3 car garage, if it's a single-family home, and it's been built in the past number of years. It's got all kinds of additional features. It's bigger, it's got a bonus room, it's got 3 bathrooms, blah, blah, blah. So we have to think about what we're building and where we're building and what the cost of that is. If we want to keep some entry-level homes, we have to build like they're entry-level homes, and we haven't been doing that. There's also all new building codes, some of which, like health and safety codes, earthquake codes. Obviously, we need to have those. But we have to then think about what the cost of adding some of these things are and who should be paying for that. I think we do need to get for climate change to zero, net zero emissions from homes. But maybe we need a tax credit to pay for those costs, not just, we've had solar tax credits, but how do we incentivize those good things that we want without passing the cost on to the consumer, right? That's really the struggle that we have with some of the new codes and requirements that we put on homes. The last thing around the cost of homes that I want to talk about is we do have, as a result of our housing crisis and other issues, we have a lack of labor, a lack of skilled and trained labor to produce the homes that we need. During the recession of 2008, most of the construction workforce was laid off. They moved, to Las Vegas, to Phoenix, wherever for less expensive lifestyles, change of careers. We have a, age issue. If you're a construction worker, you're kind of done by 50. So this is a real problem for California. We've stopped immigration, which was not California's issue, but we've stopped immigration, which was replenishing the construction workforce during that period of time too. So we don't, the labor is a problem. So we need to think about, I love Tina Johnson Hall's comment about being innovative and flexible. We need innovative ways to build more cost effectively through manufacturing, panelization in factories, using a workforce that can work inside a factory but not, doesn't have the skills to work on site, and do more modular construction, more panelized construction at a much reduced cost. We really need to think about the ways from the codes to the actual construction of how we incentivize. And I think, tax system is one area where we could really do that to actually produce more cost effectively than we are doing today. And then the last thing, and I think probably the most important for the ideas around taxes that you've talked about, property tax abatement and other forms of property tax incentives, I think we really need to talk about who paid for the cost of infrastructure for these homes. Back in the last time we had a major building boom was post-World War II. My father came home from the Navy, bought because he was white, could buy a little home, 1% down on a VA loan. But who built that home? The private sector built the home, but all of the infrastructure was paid for by the federal government. Okay, federal highway system built the roads out to Levittown. The developer didn't pay for those. The homeowner didn't pay for those. General property, general taxes paid for those. So infrastructure, water and sewer grants, cities all over the communities all over the country got water and sewer grants to build out their infrastructure, electrification. All that infrastructure was built by government dollars. Now, and I've heard a number of you talk about fees, right? Now, the developer has to pay for all of the infrastructure in not very transparent ways, although Assemblymember Grayson has worked hard on trying to make the fee structures more transparent and understandable. But you've got developers paying for all those fees, and then the cost is getting passed on into the cost of the home or the cost of the renting that home. And, I just heard recently, and I know my colleague David Garcia from Turner Center will speak later, but, he's done work on impact fees, he's done work on the cost of building, and on the impact fees, they're very varied by location. Whether they actually get used for the infrastructure costs that the home builder is being charged for is not always the case of where the money actually goes once the developer pays the fees. So I think we really do need to think about how do we use, I'm just going to use a word that Governor Brown would just, have a heart attack about, but, redevelopment funding uses property taxes up front to pay for these kinds of costs, whether it's toxic cleanup on a site to make it usable, whether it's infrastructure needs on an infill site. And I think we really need to bring back some type of use of property tax to pay for these infrastructure costs to then lower the cost to the consumer on a ongoing basis. So that's one idea. I also know the legislature's talked about a property tax, some type of abatement exemption for more middle income, not just for the extremely low income, not just for affordable housing production, but for that middle income. And I do think almost everything you heard the legislators and the administration talk about great work that's been done in California over the past couple of years. Very, very little of it has focused on this income level that is above, say, 80% of the median income. And I think until we address that level, we're going to keep on spending more and more money on homelessness and on affordable housing because we're going to keep siphoning people into poverty by not providing housing for everyone. And what I mean by that is, it's like musical chairs. And so the lower-income people are going to keep getting outbid by middle-income people, and middle-income people are not going to be able to save to buy a home. So, it's a vicious cycle. So we have to keep taking care of the unhoused, and we want to use our deep public subsidies to take care of the very lowest incomes and the unhoused. But I think we need to use our regulatory system and our tax system to ensure that the market is enabled to work for people with a median income in California, because that's, we're not going to get deep targeted subsidy from the federal government to do that. That's got to be our responsibility as a state. So I will stop there.
Oh,
And
no, please go on. I appreciate that. Your presentation is, it's fantastic. Just real quick about tax abatement. The Board of Equalization, historically, the Board of Equalization, we are in charge of managing the property tax system. And so it doesn't feel like a new conversation to consider tax abatement as a vehicle to spur on housing. However, new in the sense that, kind of like sticking with your grandfather and father example, it hasn't really been recently used, not part of the discussions and the financing schemes and just the overall thought. So what we're trying to do is force our way into the conversation and then establish ourselves in the lane. I wanted to check in with you to see if you had any thoughts around our discussion today, this work group, property tax abatement. We are really here to receive information from a whole battery of experts and then figure out our next steps. Do you have advice on our next steps? Are we moving down the right way? Are we going to be facing challenges? What are other people or other municipalities doing as well? I mean, it's a lot of questions. You have 1 minute to answer all of them.
Well, I do know you're going to have some speakers from other states, and
that's
I
right.
do think some of the work that they've done in New York and other places around abatements, not just for, so, we have the welfare exemption for under 80% of the median income. It's complicated. It has to include, a nonprofit involved in the development. It also means that individual in that apartment has to be certified as under 80% of the median income. Otherwise, that property exemption is lost.
Right.
And so I think thinking about abatements, not just for that class of properties, but for, let's call them not luxury. People talk about luxury apartments. The only reason luxury apartments, quote unquote, get built is because that's what you have to charge a luxurious rent in order to, make your numbers pencil as a developer. If we can provide some property tax abatements to developers, as long as they are providing, a portion of their funds, the abatement, to create affordability, maybe just for a period of time. Maybe it goes up over time. But it's one way of getting the price point lower. And I think you can do that along with lowering the cost of the actual construction. You can do that along with upzoning property, so that when you have more units on a piece of property, then your land cost gets divided. I mean, there are ways, I think, to leverage the property tax abatement for other cost savings in the process as well.
So you are the founder and advisor of Turner Center for Housing and Innovation at UC Berkeley and the Housing Lab.
Yes.
What made you come up with the idea, or what led to the idea that you needed to establish such an institution?
Well, because it was clear to me that this was in 2015 when we were really seeing huge spikes in rents. And, I had just come back from the Obama administration, and it's like, yeah, I'm really interested in teaching and such, but we need innovation in our policies and in our practice. And you've got to tie those together. So we are all about, at the Turner Center, researching, what are the issues, understanding and making some recommendations for better policy, and then how you actually implement that in practice. And I think you need that virtuous cycle as opposed to a vicious cycle of, continuing to go down the path that we're on, and particularly in California.
All right, thank you. Let me see, colleagues, any questions? Yes, please.
That's great. Thank you for your presentation, just very illuminating, a lot of great ideas. Can you tell me, do you have a handle on what the cost is? When we add up the fees and all the costs that the developer has to pay to build a housing unit, do you have a number of what, like an average number for the state or a range of what that costs?
So the entire process certainly varies significantly geographically. Labor costs, for instance, it's much more expensive in the Bay Area than in Southern California, and more expensive in kind of Los Angeles area than it is in Central Valley. Now, again, part of that is what you're building. It's a lot cheaper to build a one-story, single-family home on a square foot basis. It's more expensive to build a multifamily building that, you've got structural issues, et cetera. But you're building smaller, so, the total cost of the apartment is going to be less than a large house, if that makes sense. But I would say, for an apartment on average, the Bay Area is $700,000 or more. I've heard $1 million in San Francisco. Haven't seen the numbers on that, but and then it's less as you do less density. Say in the Sacramento area, but it's still getting up to $500,000-$600,000. And fees in this, just an example, fees in the city of Fremont for an apartment are $150,000 a unit before you put a stick in the ground.
Wow. Yeah.
And if you're paying on average $100,000 a unit for land, you spend $250,000 and you haven't built anything yet.
Yeah. So what is the remedy for that? I mean, you mentioned subsidies. That maybe there should be subsidies for certain aspects.
So again, I think you want to try to avoid deep public subsidies. But I do think using incentives, tax incentives, which is a form of a subsidy, and tax abatements, and incentives to get the cost lower. So, if you build under X number of square feet for your single-family house, maybe you get a tax incentive. You build, if you want to require building net zero, I think the state needs to pay for it.
Thank you. We're going to move on down here, Mr.
Thank you.
Just I'm sorry.
Just a final comment. I love this example that you've given us on the entry-level home, because if we can incentivize developers to build a smaller unit, because it is a starter home, right? So even 3-bedroom, 1-bath, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, so that someone can afford to at least get into it, and then of course we got to look at all the cost drivers too and try to resolve all those issues. But I really love your idea, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Eppolite.
First, thank you for your presentation. Going forward, how do we address this labor shortage issue?
Well, I think one of the the big ways we need to address it is by building differently than we do today. So I'm a big proponent, and I'll full disclosure, I'm on the advisory board of Factory OS on Mare Island in Vallejo. It's building a lot of affordable housing. It's using second chance workers, people coming out of prison. They offer, GED education. They offer incredible training. But you're taking people who were waitresses, you're opening up the workforce when you're doing a more ergonomically easy job of construction. You're opening up the workforce. You're still paying a good wage. In this case, they're represented by the Carpenters Union, so it's a unionized factory. So they have benefits. Do they make, I don't know what the wage rate for a carpenter, journeyman carpenter is, but no, they don't make the same amount as a really skilled carpenter, but they don't need those skills inside the factory, and they have good middle-class jobs and security. So I think you need to change how we think about, this goes back to innovation, you need to think about how we build, because I don't think there are enough skilled workers, without changing immigration system. This is not an industry that, young people are moving into naturally.
Thank you. Mr. Vasquez has a question.
Just a quick question. When you talked about how to reduce the costs, have you experienced or worked with anybody that's done like prefab homes? Because I know we did it in some of the schools, and it seemed to save quite a bit of money.
Yes.
That's what she just was describing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
that's
no,
what
I was
you're-
talking about modular panelization, which is a form of.
A form of it, yeah.
A form of prefab,
But,
absolutely.
But they have them full-blown now.
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
'Cause some
Building,
are just walls, but, I mean, you can buy the whole kit.
yes, and this factory that I talked about in Northern California is doing that. It's built 1,500 units, so 75% are affordable or supportive housing units. They come to the site, and they have everything but the skin and the roof, down to the toilet paper holders inside.
Thank you for your presentation. I've actually had a chance to go to Factory OS several years ago when I was still on the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco. It's a phenomenal operation, and kudos to the carpenters for having that vision to get in there. So we're going to pivot now
Yes.
and hear from Dr. Ward. Oh, yes.
Mrs. Galante, I come from San Diego area, and we've built Harbor Island, Shelter Island. We've built some land, off the other land. I don't know if that's cost effective or not, but, that's something that might be evaluated to create some housing land that is really just to fill in. It's worked for 50 years. I've been watching it in San Diego.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like, we like to say you can't manufacture new land, but maybe you can.
All right, we're going to hear from Dr. Ward now. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Cohen. Thanks to Chair Cohen and the distinguished members of the board. My name is Jason Ward. I'm an economist at the RAND Corporation in Santa Monica. One key aspect of my research is exploring the role of incentives in housing policy and relatedly of the unintended consequences that arise from them. This focus is reflected in the comments I prepared today on the state of housing production and affordability in Los Angeles, some lessons from policy, and how property tax abatements might play a constructive role in addressing the region's urgent housing needs. I'll offer preemptive apology about potentially exceeding my mandate in terms of subject matter, as I wasn't super sure of what you wanted to hear from me, but I may just presuppose your questions, Chair Cohen, about some ideas regarding tax abatements in Southern California.
We will welcome them.
So in Los Angeles, 60% of the population are renters. The 2019 USC survey found that 73% of these households were rent burdened, and nearly half were severely rent burdened, meaning that they pay over 50% of their income for housing. From 2015 to 2019, the average market rent for a 3-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles increased by around 40%, while over this same period, the area median income only increased by 23%. This mismatch is a key driver of the missing middle phenomenon, where working families earning middle-class incomes are increasingly priced out of the regional housing market. On the home ownership front, Los Angeles County and most of the rest of Southern California has seen median home prices nearly double in the last decade, putting this path to housing stability out of reach for millions of households. This unprecedented price growth is now slowing due to interest rate increases aimed at taming inflation. But this decline in home sales has also slowed the flow of home buyers exiting the rental market, placing an even greater upward pressure on rents. Perhaps the most salient sign of our area housing shortage is the well-known homelessness crisis, which likely needs no introduction. While there's a lack of current information on the number of people experiencing literal homelessness on the streets of the county, a good estimate is that it's probably a minimum of 40,000 people. And a recent study over the pandemic period found that these individuals were dying on the streets of LA at a rate of about 1,000 a month.
1,000 a month.
Yes, ma'am. The six-cycle RENA process resulted in a mandate for LA County to facilitate the production of around 100,000 units of housing per year over the next 8 years, of which 40% needs to be affordable to those with incomes at or below 80% of the area median. And to contextualize that in terms of Secretary Castro Ramirez's comment, LA County has basically a responsibility to produce about a third of the overall state housing shortage that she mentioned. However, in the last 20 years, the average annual housing production in the county has been around 15,000 units per year. Meeting the six-cycle RENA goals would require the region to reach sustained levels of housing production not seen in around a century. So this dire sketch highlights the need to find new, simple, and effective policies to significantly increase the production of housing at both affordable and market rate prices. In recent years, many potentially effective legislative efforts to spur housing production at the state level, such as SB 50, have failed to advance out of the legislature, while other bills such as SB 9 that began with significant potential have become law, but only after taking on so many additional requirements and restrictions that their overall effect on housing production in the state may ultimately be difficult to measure. In the context of the Los Angeles region, some of the most effective policies of which I'm aware have emerged at the local level. One such example is the Transit-Oriented Communities Program, which was introduced in 2017. TOC is a voluntary program for qualifying projects built near transit hubs, comprising significant density bonuses and other incentives that are tiered based on the portion of affordable housing that a development includes. While the program's maximum incentives only apply to around 9% of the city's land, last year nearly 1/3 of all new applications for housing developments were proposed under this program. Similarly, the city's 1999 Adaptive Reuse Ordinance, which created a dramatically streamlined pathway to repurposing scores of disused buildings in downtown LA by increasing allowable density, eliminating parking requirements, and prescribing the use of alternative building codes and other forms of regulatory forbearance, has been credited with sparking the production of approximately 7% of housing produced in LA between 1999 and 2014, despite the fact that the ordinance only applies to around 1% of the land in the city. An updated version of this ordinance is nearing completion and may portend the start of a second wave of adaptive reuse downtown. So how might these challenges and successes inform the use of property tax abatements as a tool to spur housing production? In the current Southern California context, two primary goals seem most relevant for a program to use abatements. The first is broadly increasing the supply of rental housing, which puts natural downward pressure on rents. The second is increasing the number of housing units offered at more deeply affordable rents than would emerge even under significant increases in the overall supply. The first of these goals may be the most effective way to address the missing middle issue. While the exact definition of income associated with the middle is not widely agreed upon, it generally refers to families and individuals who are earning incomes that are in many cases sufficient to procure housing at the lower end of the range of market rates, though such housing may be more scarce than would be optimal both in terms of location and quantity. Thus, policy efforts that result in the widespread growth of the rental housing stock at the lower end of current market rates may be sufficient to address this need without the added complexity of restrictive covenants, joint powers authorities, and the associated implementation and monitoring costs of these types of programs or requirements. The second goal, producing deeply affordable housing, is a greater challenge. But here, abatements can play a role as an incentive for increasing the inclusion of low or very low income units in otherwise market rate housing developments, an arrangement that has considerable benefits relative to publicly funded 100% affordable projects, since these units do not require an ongoing source of operating subsidy. Abatement-related incentives could be layered on top of existing inclusionary zoning type programs, offering density bonuses and other incentives. Abatements might play a particularly key role in jurisdictions that have mandatory rather than voluntary inclusionary zoning programs, Some evidence suggests that such programs may stifle rather than promote the production of housing. In both cases, abatements can significantly lower the early operating costs of a new development, since property taxes are a relatively large proportion of these overall costs. A simple back-of-the-envelope example suggests that an abatement that started at 100% and then phased out at 10% a year over a decade could represent a savings of around 5 to 6% of a project's total development costs. Thus, abatements can have a substantial effect on whether or not a project will pencil. One approach touched on by the BOE work group document is providing abatements to first-time home buyers. However, in my opinion, this is unlikely to contribute meaningfully to solving housing production issues in the state. It might even exacerbate them. This is because abatements provided to individual home buyers only directly affect the demand side of the housing market, and thus could only incentivize increased housing supply if homebuyer beneficiaries bid up the existing supply of homes enough to induce an indirect supply response by developers. In this scenario, it seems likely to think that any increased supply would likely be at the higher end of the range of market prices we currently have. Another potentially powerful use of abatements to incentivize new housing would be to offer them to owners of commercial properties for redevelopment as housing. A recent RAND report assessing the potential for adaptive reuse of underutilized commercial real estate to grow the housing supply in Los Angeles found that many office buildings in high-resource areas would transact at market prices that would make redevelopment into housing financially infeasible at current market rates for multi-unit housing in these same areas. But offering a tax abatement for an existing owner to undertake such a project could sidestep this need for the market transaction, instead moving the financial feasibility question to the cost of redevelopment plus any change in income streams resulting from the change of use. Since the pandemic, a number of these conversion projects have been undertaken by existing building owners in LA, and this increasing unsubsidized market activity suggests that there may be other projects that are close to the margin of fiscal feasibility, where a well-designed abatement program could make a difference. Strengthening this path would create new housing while contributing to environmental goals related to reducing the carbon footprint of housing production, reducing vehicle miles traveled, and potentially increasing the housing supply in jobs-rich areas where it's most in need. One major caveat regarding the characteristics of a successful abatement program is that explicitly tying eligibility to now common requirements in state-level housing policy, such as the payment of prevailing wages, skilled and trained workforce requirements, or other overly prescriptive rules around inclusionary zoning, environmental standards, and the like, would be likely to significantly attenuate or eliminate any positive effects on housing production. However, these types of goals could be incorporated in a tiered approach such that committing to them would qualify a project for a more generous abatement along the lines of what Ms. Calante was suggesting. This type of voluntary incentive-based approach is what has been used in LA's Transit-Oriented Communities program, and this flexibility has likely been a key factor in its success. So in summary, property tax abatements can play a potentially large role in the kind of all-of-the-above approach that is required for Southern California to successfully address its unprecedented housing affordability crisis. But, as is so often the case, the specific form such a policy takes is likely to play an outsized role in whether it would succeed or fail. Thanks very much. I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Let me see. In the interest of time, colleagues, do you have any brief questions for Dr. Ward?
Clarification, if I could.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Ward, for your presentation. Can you just expand a little bit, because you mentioned that abatement, it sounded like an abatement to a developer would actually be more effective than one to a home buyer.
Yeah, that's my personal opinion. I mean, my personal opinion about the current state of the situation in California is that, you were discussing this earlier, home price levels are so high right now that, in an ideal world, what we'd like to do is just go back to prices in 2000 or something, right? But that would be incredibly destabilizing for many reasons, right? And in some sense, it's quite unrealistic, absent a kind of financial meltdown or something, right? So really, I think curbing the rate of growth of home prices is a key factor, and rental prices are sort of inexorably tied up with home prices. So most people in my region, are renters, and really, to me, the sort of triage approach suggests that the first best thing you can do is try to lower the price of renting, right? It reduces the relative attractiveness of sort of trying to get into a home at any price, you know, abstracting from issues of tax benefit and things like that. But, you know, more importantly, giving, as I mentioned, giving abatements directly to potential homeowners really just lowers the cost of housing and would serve to drive up prices in the same way that very low interest rates over the last couple of years served to drive up home prices by lowering the overall monthly cost of home ownership without really doing much to increase supply.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
All right, thank you. We need to keep moving to hear from other panelists. Oh, yeah.
You mentioned on the adaptive reuse, you know, especially of some of the old buildings downtown LA that has been going on as we speak. But did you ever, in your studies and your research, did you look at some of the vacant lots as well as some of the school properties that are underutilized?
Right, I think-
Potentially turn them into housing.
I think that's an important area. That's an important resource due to land cost, you know, to look at anything like that. However, you know, I think in some sense, those kinds of things don't necessarily address the kind of environmental goals in that you have to sort of, you know, demolish a site and build from scratch. I think another key benefit of adaptive reuse per se, that is, you know, kind of keeping the outside of a building and converting what is done on the inside of it, is that it may be a way to sort of sidestep some of the issues with NIMBY opposition to housing. You know, to some extent, if a building is there and it just goes from having people working during the day to people living in it, that may engender less community opposition and other issues than, say, a complete, you know, I have a 15-unit apartment building being built across the residential street from my house right now, and it's not the greatest thing that's ever happened to my daily quality of life, but I'm very much for it, you know, but a lot of other people wouldn't necessarily feel that way. And so I think adaptive reuse has that additional potential to just sort of meet environmental goals and also maybe just not be as much of a salient disruption to people who might otherwise have objections to new housing being constructed.
And when you're looking at some of these buildings, not only like, for example, a lot of the hotels, for example, downtown, there's a lot of office buildings now, given COVID, where people are now leaving them, and the need, I think, for so much office space may reduce.
Yes, sir. That was what
dramatically.
inspired me to sort of follow up on that issue. However, office prices have been sort of stubbornly high, so that's where I think something like an abatement that really just incentivized a change of use rather than the building having to transact to a new person who would build may be a really nice way to think about deploying this kind of a strategy.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next perspective of speakers that we're going to hear from are speakers from the perspective of funders. Dr. Ward, thank you very much. Ms.
Thank you.
Galante, we appreciate your comments. Ms. Cicchetti, would you like to call the next group of speakers?
Yes. The next group of speakers are Funders Perspective, Nancy Robles, Executive Director, California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, and California Debt Limitation Committee, California State Treasurer's Office. Kate Ferguson, Director, Multifamily Programs, Strategy and Legal Affairs, California Housing Finance Agency. Michael Flood, Director, Production Division, Multifamily West Region, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and Mr. Josh Hamilton, Senior Vice President, Century Housing Corporation. Please come forward.
All right, thank you.
We have some on virtual as well.
We do have some on virtual. Thank you very much for joining us both online and in person. It's very good to see you today and to welcome you. Just very quickly, I saw earlier Mr. Marti. Is he not presenting? No? Okay. Thank you very much. We will begin with you. Is it Robles or Robles?
Robles.
Robles. Fantastic, Nancy. Thank you, Ms. Robles, for being here. Executive Director of TCAC and CIDLAC. Two very important acronyms that probably few people know about, but have an incredible, huge impact on the state of California when it comes to housing. So we will hear from you first, and then second, we will hear from Kate Ferguson. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. So first, I'd like to thank the board here and Chair Cohen for having me here. I'm truly honored. And second, I would like to apologize in advance. I'll be running out the door as soon as I'm finished with my presentation and the questions. So my name is Nancy Robles, and I'm the Executive Director of the California Tax Allocation Committee and the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee. Earlier, you heard from Treasurer Fiona Ma, that's my boss. And the Treasurer has asked me to direct both of these state committees to provide some cohesiveness and uniformity to these two different tax incentive committees. These are for affordable housing, and they're run through the treasurer's office. And no, I don't get two salaries. This concept of having agencies work together to house Californians is very fitting to what the Property Tax Abatement Work Group is trying to achieve as well. So let me first start by explaining what these two committees do and get straight into the alphabet soup. California Debt Limit Allocation Committee is CDLAC, and California Tax Credit Allocation Committee is TCAC. CDLAC is in charge of the state debt ceiling, also called the volume cap. Each year, the IRS provides each state in the nation an amount that can be authorized to create tax-exempt debt in its state. The formula is based on the state's population, and there's also a set factor that's adjusted for inflation. In 2022, the debt ceiling for California was $4.3 billion. This amount of debt authority can be used for a number of tax-exempt facility bonds like intercity rail projects, recycling facilities, solid and sewage waste, clean energy, and of course, affordable housing that we call qualified residential rent projects. Some more alphabets for the soup, we call it QRP, QRRP. In previous administrations, the Treasurer's Office focused on pollution control to issue the state volume cap for exempt facilities. But since Treasurer Ma was elected, our focus has been on affordable housing. So each year, over 90% of the state ceiling is dedicated to affordable housing, and this year, 92% went to affordable housing. TCAC awards state tax credits and federal tax credits for affordable housing. This means affordable housing developers apply for tax credits, and then they sell those to private investors to fund their project operations. Without bond sales and tax credits, the QRRP projects would not be feasible. In today's economic environment, housing developers are having a hard time making those projects pencil out even with this assistance. In 2020 and 2021, the governor gave TCAC $500 million a year in addition for state tax credits, with the caveat that in order to be awarded those tax credits, you also had to apply for a bond. This was intended to encourage affordable housing projects to apply for bonds and tax credits to maximize the state resources to get affordable housing units to the market as quickly as possible. This is one of the many tools that the governor has offered to catapult this progress in this time of our housing crisis. This also created an oversubscription of bonds and tax credits. For the last 3 years, we have had 3 times the applications to build affordable housing than we've had resources for. It's a great sign that we have developers out there who are willing and ready to produce units, yet it created a need for a competitive process to be sure that we got the best bang for our state buck. So that was the good news. The most recent challenges that we're facing is the rising cost of construction materials, gas, labor costs, shortages of human capital, supply chain issues, and rises in interest rates. This volatile market has created a situation where shovel-ready affordable housing projects that receive bonds and tax credits based on bids from 6 months ago can't start their construction because the costs went up millions of dollars between now and then. They're forced to request additional resources from the committee or risk failure of their projects. And they've already invested millions of dollars into these projects. So, they have no incentive to fail. So they're coming to us for additional funding. And providing these resources helps those projects, yet it takes resources away from future projects. Even with limited resources over the last few years, we've been able to assist in the production of 23,000 low-income rental units a year. Since the inception of these programs in 1987, we've assisted with the production of over 500,000 units in California. We also monitor and physically inspect each property on a routine basis. The goal set by Housing and Community Development is 2.5 million units by 2030, which means that we're going to need to produce about 304,000 units each year in the next 8 years. But we're not alone in this. There are other state agencies that are also assisting in the production of housing, like the Housing and Community Development, HCD that we'll hear from, and California Housing Finance Agency you heard from earlier, and also California Veterans. Altogether, we're all going to be hard-pressed to meet those goals. So the bottom line is the focus of CIDLAC and TCAC is to help homeless, very low income and extremely low income houses obtain rental housing, yet the concept of the missing middle is not lost on us. With our focus on multifamily rentals and no other resources available, we've had to abandon a previous program that we had for single-family first-time home buyers that gave mortgage credits to reduce a federal tax liability. And since this session is a fact-finding mission, I feel compelled to share my own experience about the missing middle. My father never owned a home, so when he died, he also left no inheritance. I was homeless at 17 years old, and only because of some good friends, my charming personality, and the grace of God, I couch surfed and borrowed my friends' clothing until I found a job and earned enough money to rent an apartment. And of course, I had roommates. I struggled to pay rent and to buy food. Homeownership and college weren't even things that I could afford to dream about. Even after I married and had a family of 4 children in our 2-family income household, we lived like most Californians today, paycheck to paycheck, making too much money for low-income housing, but just enough to provide our kids with the bare basic minimum, and never even thought about buying a house. But one day, our landlord came to us and asked us if we wanted to buy the house that we were renting and living in. And my immediate reaction was, I can't. I don't have any money for a down payment, and no bank is going to lend money to me. And after all, I knew, because at the time, I was a mortgage loan lender. Faced with a 30-day notice to move out so that the landlord could sell that house to somebody else, and no savings to secure another rental property, first, last, and a security deposit, I swallowed my pride and I asked a relative if I could get a loan that they knew I'd never be able to pay back. And I can't believe they said yes. Again, the charming personality, I suppose. I used that $2,500 for a down payment to buy that house. And because the down payment was so small, I had to pay a higher interest rate for the loan, making the payment higher than I really felt like I could afford. And on top of that, I had to pay an extra 25% on top of the payment for PMI insurance. Knowing that I was always one lost paycheck away from bankruptcy and homelessness, I was scared to death. I didn't care that that wasn't my dream house, and trust me, it was far from it. I knew that I was building wealth. And for the first time in my family, I owned a home, and I was beginning the cycle of generational equity. This may be really obvious to the board, but if you're listening on the phone, I feel like I need to tell you that most people that have lived through this story don't look like me. And many whose stories start out like mine don't reach the happy ending of securing a loan. You see, even though my name is Robles, I am not black or brown. Treasurer Mott mentioned the California Dream for All program earlier, and that was a study to explore ways to assist low-income and the missing middle Californians with down payments to help create homeownership. The study showed statistics on racial disparities where people of color are far less likely to receive a down payment assistance, and the percentage of home loans to Black and Latino families are 20% less than their share of the population. If we are to help the missing middle, we must first incentivize home developers to build these homes. Doing so creates jobs, it spurs economic development, and it strengthens communities. We can do this by expanding the resources that we offer. You can never have too many tools in the toolbox, and I hope that the property tax abatement can be one of those tools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing your personal story. Thank you. I think it will resonate with many people. We're going to have to pivot and hold our questions. We're going to go to Ms. Kate Ferguson, Director of Multifamily Housing Division, Policy Strategy, Legislative Affairs, Cal HFA. Ms. Ferguson, are you on the line? Thank you.
Yes.
Good to see you.
Can you hear me now?
I can. We can hear you and see you.
Good morning, Chair Cohen.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Cohen. Thank you for offering me the opportunity to speak today. I have to admit I'm a late addition to your roster, so I'm going to speak very briefly about who Cal HFA is. I know that you heard, I believe, from Tina Johnson Hall this morning, but who the multifamily lending group is. Our primary role in the state, first of all, let me say, my name is Kate Ferguson. I'm the Director of Multifamily Programs. I've been with Cal HFA for 3 years, and I come from a long background in affordable housing lending, primarily with large money center banks, as well as with working for a nonprofit organization, which was a affordable housing developer. So I've been in this business for about 30 plus years. Cal HFA's role in the state of California as a partner in addressing the housing crisis is really, from a lender's perspective, we have 3 primary roles. And that is as issuer of tax-exempt bonds, which Ms. Robles just spoke about, the bond cap that goes towards affordable housing in the state. We issue a lot of those bonds. We are the state's issuer, and we, along with a variety of other issuers throughout the state, are issued those tax-exempt bonds. We also are a subsidy lender through our mixed income program, and we also are a permanent lender through which we pair with our mixed income program, which is a subsidy program. We do long-term permanent financing on affordable housing, multifamily developments. So one of the things I think that we want to talk about today in talking about the housing crisis is just the complexity of the issues here. The housing crisis historically, in my career at least, has been targeted at households that have been really 60% of area median income, which of course varies depending on the county, 60% and below. So we're talking about extremely low income, very low income, and low income households. And that the spectrum of the need really has expanded since, I'm going to say since 2017-18, when the middle income households at 60% of area median income, 80%, 120% really started to be priced out of their markets. So, and that's I think you've heard a lot of the reasons why that's happened today, but it's not something that the affordable housing industry has dealt with for the past 30 years. I mean, the focus has started to change, and especially in the state of California, the focus on what we call the missing middle has become more of a priority. And here at Cal HFA, our primary program, our mixed income program, originally was set up to meet the needs of that missing middle, to meet the needs of the missing middle and to leverage the incomes of those higher income rents to provide also stability, economic stability to projects, multifamily projects, at lower income rents as well. So our missing middle or mixed income program, as we call it, is designed to pair with tax-exempt bonds and 4% low-income housing tax credits. It's designed to take advantage of changes to the 2018 federal tax code, which allowed for income averaging and facilitated more development of units between 60 and 80% AMI, area median income. And so it's really designed as a subsidy loan program, which requires repayment at maturity. And we're seeing that most of our deals, we pair it with our long-term permanent debt. So really these deals roll through about a 15-year, generally the tax credit compliance period, which is a 15 to 17-year permanent loan period. And the benefit we find from this program and the success that we've had in this program has really come from the fact that when you have a broad spectrum of affordability levels, you also have a broad spectrum of rental levels. So your higher income rents at 80 to 120% of area median income can offset the cost of the lower income rents and bring the overall income of the project up, allowing it to leverage more, which stretches our very, very valuable state resources further, or subsidy resources further. So it also requires, it requires less subsidy overall and less layers to the capital stack that goes into building one of these projects. So we originally we've had great success with this program. We launched it in 2019. We, after this year's, we've just received the allocations from SIDLAC for this year's applications. And overall, we've done 7,600 units with this program over a 4-year period. And we found that we can generally get the projects, if there is a mix of incomes, to development quicker with fewer lenders in the capital stack. Now, from a lender's perspective, I think I want to go to sort of what you're talking about here today, which is the property tax exemption. And the property tax exemption, I'm sure you've heard, plays a huge role in the affordability of these projects and in the economic viability of the projects. I think going forward, we're hearing a lot in the market, and from a lender's perspective, a lot in the market from market rate and mixed income. So what we call an 80-20 deal, an 80% market rate or with a 20% affordable rate, about getting more access to the tax exemption. And that is something that county to county, there are lots of opportunities here to use the momentum built for people looking for a property tax exemption, potentially to get a higher commitment to building more affordable housing, regardless of whether it's extremely low, very low, or the missing middle housing. So from a lender's perspective, as a lender, I believe in leverage. I believe in being very judicious with the use of our subsidy dollars so that we can build more units with every dollar. And when you talk about the property tax exemption, the benefit to the county, I think county to county, it has to be discussed whether or not it makes more sense to make an investment into a deal up front in the form of some sort of capital injection, or whether the long-term commitment to a property tax exemption, which helps to improve the ongoing cash flow of the project over a long period of time, which one of those makes most sense for a county. But fundamentally, I think what we always want to be sure of is that this is a huge and very valuable tool in the industry. And as we consider expanding it, the conversation, I'm hopeful, will include a conversation about not just expanding access to the property tax exemption, but also really thinking through what that can sort of bring to the table in terms of more units for extremely low, very low, and the missing middle especially. And there are lots of creative ways to do that. And I'm sensitive to the fact that counties, you can either provide a property tax exemption to a market rate project, and what that does is it increases the yield of the investors on that project. When you provide a property tax exemption to a market rate project that also includes affordable units, so units at or below 80% of AMI, you really are adding to the affordable housing. First, you're adding to the affordable housing, to the availability of housing, and second, you're providing it in a way where we are not just we're using projects that are already under development to leverage new affordable housing. So from my perspective, that's really important. And I think Nancy covered a lot of what we're doing with state tax credits and how we're leveraging that with the tax exempt bonds. We also have a bond recycling program, which we are trying to figure out how to use that to do more of these mixed income buildings, how to work with counties to say maybe a property tax. Right now, the property tax exemption only goes to the units that are affordable. A huge incentive would be to say, if you put 20% of the units affordable, maybe we give you 25% of a property tax exemption, you know, to get more developers to do this. But having the exemption available for more units is something I know that's a constant discussion topic at the developer stage. And for me as a lender, I think our ability to leverage to provide the higher income units and then to leverage them to also provide the very low and extremely low income units has been a really a great win for us at Kelly HFA, and we will continue to do that. And I'm sorry I don't have a formal presentation. I think I'll take questions if that's.
Well, thank you. You're actually, I think, one of the third speaker from Cal HFA to make a presentation today. So your funding perspective has actually been incredibly insightful. Unfortunately, we need to keep moving forward, and I have to listen. I have to not listen. Well, listen, yes, but invite up the other members on the panel. So, Ms. Ferguson, thank you for sharing your expertise and your perspective. The next person we're going to hear from is Larry Flood. He's the Production Division Director of Multifamily West Region, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Mr. Flood, are you on the line? Okay. Mr. Flood is not with us. Let's go to Josh Hamilton. He's the Senior Vice President of Century Housing Corporation. Josh Hamilton? Okay. I don't know. Maybe they did. All right. Well, I'm going to ask colleagues, do you have any? Where'd the colleague? Okay. Do you guys have any questions for Cal HFA? No? Okay. Thank you. We will just keep moving forward then. We will move on to our next panel of speakers. Ms. Cicchetti, would you please call the next speakers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Our next set of speakers are for the developer's perspective. Cornelius Burke, Vice President and Legislative Affairs, California Building Industry Association. Ray Pearl, Executive Director, California Housing Consortium. Kenneth T. Lombard, President and CEO, Bridge Housing. And Shireen Sandage, President, Black Developers Forum and Sandage Urban Group. Please come forward.
All right, thank you very much. It's good to see you. Thank you for coming and joining us in this discussion. You guys are presenting a unique perspective from the developers. And Shireen, how do you pronounce your last name?
Sandage.
Sandage. Ms. Sandage, we're going to start with you first, and then Mr. Burke will go to you. All right, thank you.
Great. First of all, thank you, Chair Cohen, for the invitation to come speak. I guess I'm one of your last-minute addies, and good for you because I have a lot to say on this topic.
Excellent.
I am a real estate developer. I've been in the industry for about 38 years, and I've seen a lot of changes come and go. I represent the Black Developers Forum, which was created in 2020 due to a response of the new legislation that was being proposed and presented by TCAC and CIDLAC, where it would have fundamentally omitted Black developers throughout the state of California. And the reason being is because we're the last in, we're the first out. And because of that, we have not had the opportunity to build a pipeline, financial credentials, et cetera, that would have sustained us enough to do continual projects and get in 5 to 10 within a 5 to 10 year period. We are mostly developers that you probably have heard and gave kudos to other organizations for building their products. We were the behind-the-scene folks. In 2020, we decided to step out because it became clear to us that we were going to be the legacy for Black developers and the Black community. And because of the changes that were being proposed, it necessitated us coming together as a statewide forum. So we represent most, if not all, the developers, the Black developers, and their communities that are undertaking affordable housing issues as it stands right now. We were also successful at advocating for the $125 million BIPOC, which is Black Indigenous People of Color set-aside pool with the state of California's tax credit and the CIDLAC bond program. And because of that, we've also been instrumental and at the table writing legislation for HCD and most of the forum and most of the housing programs. This is a benefit to the state of California because we had been omitted from those tables and those discussions for so long. And it became clear to them that because of our experience, 30, 35, 40 years experience, we know these programs. I started these programs when I was a housing director way back in the 70s for the city of Orange. And they were nice, they were friendly, they weren't competitive, we built housing, we walked away and there were happy faces all along. Unfortunately, that's not so much the case these days because the programs are highly competitive, they're highly complicated. Costs in Northern California, which is the area I represent, are skyrocketing. We are scrambling to try to find new innovative ways to build housing. And then, in addition to all that, be compliant with the funding sources. They're changing our dynamics from developer to, far as I'm concerned, social worker. I mean, we're having to pick up a lot of ELI, VLI, which is extremely low income and the very low income housing units. And while we understand that's a necessity, but we've been in this industry long enough to know there's other ways to address those housing as opposed to making the funding chase the lowest level housing and then have all these other extras put on the developer. Feel free to call me at any time. I will go walk through that whole scenario with you. But we are, again, we're active. We understand 100% about the missing middle. We understand that we need workforce housing. If you don't think you do, go around San Francisco and look at how many Starbucks have closed up because they can't get the young college people in there. You have got to have housing programs that address also those young professionals that need housing. I'm a mother. I have daughters that are struggling with housing. So it's very difficult for me to say, stay here in California, stay here, don't go to Austin, Texas, or don't go to, because they cannot afford housing. The simplest thing they want is home ownership. And to do that, we as developers with the boots on the ground have been charged with trying to figure out how to make that task happen. I don't want my grandkids living in Texas. I want them right here. I just moved to Sacramento. So to make a long story short, we have some creative ideas which we want to make sure are brought to the table every chance we get. Now, you've heard some folks talk already about reuse and building. Well, your biggest reuse component is going to be the shopping malls. You have to make complexity, you have to make deals, if you will, with those folks because they are strictly REIT businesses. So if to the extent you can give extended tax abatements to those folks to encourage them to sell to nonprofits so we can build on housing, which already has a foundation, that's one way that we're looking at trying to make it happen. Get used to it. Walmart, Amazon, everything you're going to get basically is going to be delivered to you somehow or another. I used to love the retail experience. That was my Saturday thing. Unfortunately, now it needs to be serving another purpose. And so we as developers, again, one of our many tasks, in addition to the social service aspect, is figuring out how we repurpose and how we become innovative. And who do we need to talk to? I can tell you, we appreciate the state of California for your excess land use program. But see, in our world, time is money. We don't have time to wait, go through 1,000 boards and stuff, because the competition is too great. And so we need to have access to a toolkit that easily transferable, that's already been approved, that we could put out on the market right now. And land use, and it is totally different, because I have developers in Southern California telling me their unique problems. They don't have a labor problem down there per se. We do. And the reason why you have a labor problem is because you're not offering any for-sale housing in the Bay Area. Those are the people who will expand your employment base. So if a general contractor, and most of our general contractors, most of our unions, our workers are all coming out from towns called Salida, Stockton area, Fresno area, and commuting in. I mean, literally, that's insane to us, but we have no choice. But that also makes the cost of labor go up, because now those folks are arguing with their labor representatives, I got to come all the way into the San Francisco Bay Area to work. How do I make that affordable to me? And so there's a lot of challenges on the table, but I encourage you that if you have some idea on how to attack the missing middle with more tax abatements. We need the BOE abatement on multifamily. We get that, and that's why it hasn't changed. We need it to be more flexible. We need it to not recapture abatement taxes. But what we do need is we need some other solutions on how to make that happen. Giving a tax abatement to the home buyer is not going to work. Proof in the pudding. No offense to Senator Weiner, because that was a good little program to transfer senior taxes to your new residents. Unfortunately, every county doesn't accept that. So that abatement or that reduction didn't help, at least it didn't help me. It doesn't help anybody if the county doesn't accept. For example, Sacramento County, I'm gonna tell on them, Sacramento County does not take the abatement for seniors as a transfer. If I'm coming from Contra Costa, they do not accept the new law for the transfer of the tax basis. And so we need to be consistent. We need to be consistent about what is being taken, what is being voted on, et cetera, in this state. And make sure that when it comes our opportunity to talk about saving our young people and keeping those jobs viable, that's got to be a priority. Now, HTD did most of your work for you. They got everybody thinking tiny homes. So I think you said it, Mr. Gaines, everybody's thinking tiny homes already. So these homes don't have to be big. They just have to have ownership criteria. They have to have the tax benefit, obviously, that everyone else enjoys. But there is a way to help do that now that our young people have caught up in tiny homes. And so I think that should be the first aspect of things that we need to be looking forward to. We need to incentivize our nonprofits to do for-sale housing as well. We do it as developers. I do it for certain nonprofits in San Francisco as well. I've been a development director for all of them at some point in time. And we need to make sure that those incentives are there to keep our young people here in California. That's where your big cycle has been exiting. Now, truly, they're getting to Texas and saying, we don't like it. We don't like the philosophy. We want to come home. There's nowhere to come home to. The rents are 3 times higher. It's just, you ran everybody out, and now there's nowhere to run, come back to. So I'm just saying, thank you for the opportunity. I'll stop here. I know timing is sensitive, and I appreciate being able to come and vent, because really, they're pulling us so far apart from developers. It's getting a little bit scary to find out who's the next generation of developers coming up. We at the Black Forum are very committed to a generational training program, and we are looking at training people of color in all sectors, property management, development, et cetera. So Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate you making time. I think I heard applause back there for your presentation. Look, Ms.
colleague
Sandage, I
Bridge.
appreciate you making time and honoring our last-minute request to come join and be a part of this conversation. As you can see, it's incredibly important.
Absolutely.
If we are going to be at the table and be policymakers, decision makers, and truly partners, we do need to hear from each other in this convening. So I know that you also have to get going too, so
Yes,
feel free to
thank you.
excuse yourself whenever you see
Okay,
fit.
Thank you. I'm going to take off now.
No problem.
As boots on the ground, I have to get to a planning commission meeting. So
I understand, and we know how to follow up with you. Colleagues, if you have questions for Ms. Sandage, we will just follow up with her. Anything quickly? All right, I think they're going to, Mr. Gaines? Senator Gaines?
Thank you very much. The shopping mall concept that you're talking about, could that include mixed use?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You would
You do
want
housing,
to-
and then you might have boutique shopping or something. I don't know.
And you might have people upstairs wanting to do entrepreneur. Everything's entrepreneur. So to the
Right.
extent you can, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
We'll be following up with you directly with more thoughtful questions, okay?
Great. Thank
All
you very
right.
much.
You're welcome. Okay, next we're going to hear from Mr. Cornelius Burke, who's the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the California Building Instruction Association, also known as the BIA. And then Mr. Ray Pearl, is that you online, I see?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Mr. Pearl, we're going to hear from you after Mr. Burke, okay?
Sounds great.
Great, thank you, Mr. Burke.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Cohen and members of the BOE. I'm Cornelius Burke, Vice President of Legislative Affairs at the California Building Industry Association. By background, I'm an urban planner. I was a real estate agent. I actually worked for the California Department of General Services as a real estate officer, where I managed the state's real estate portfolio. And I was a planning commissioner for the city of Sacramento for close to a decade. I'm delighted to be here to talk about our perspectives as home builders when it comes to housing overall, and particularly mid and middle and affordable housing. The California Building Industry Association, CBIA, we're a statewide trade association representing the home building industry. We have members who are home builders, trade contractors, architects, engineers, designers, suppliers, and everyone in the home building industry. Over the years, we've been successful in simplifying and eliminating restrictive, costly building regulations, balancing the concern for the environment and conservation with affordable housing, and ensuring that we have reasonable growth and that growth is planned and encouraged. And most importantly, we've been really saying that housing is important for the economic growth of the state. You know, housing's a winner. A lot of times people see housing as a loser. A lot of local governments see it as not producing sales tax revenue. People see housing as an impact, as a negative to their community. There's a lot of NIMBYism in our state, and we say, you know, housing is a winner, housing is good for California, you know, housing is good for the economic future of this state. So we always want more housing at all levels, particularly affordable and mid and middle housing product types. As we talked about earlier from almost all the panelists here today, we are in a housing crisis, and the housing crisis is simply because of underproduction. It's a supply and demand issue. We have not built the amount of housing that we need to keep up with population increases and demand. In fact, California ranks 49th in the nation for the fewest homes per capita, with 385 existing homes per 1,000 people compared to the national average of 419 homes per capita. We know why we have this underproduction, and it's because of the regulations. As BOE member Gaines and Senator Gaines mentioned earlier, we have extremely high impact fees and exactions on housing developers. In the Sacramento region where Mr. Gaines represents, the average impact fee is about $100,000 per home. We also have a lengthy and complex land use approval process. City councils, planning commissions, zoning boards, our land use approval process is overly complex, adds nothing but cost and time to the home building process. And also, I would never forget to mention something called CEQA, which adds nothing but pain, headache, and cost to the home building process. Then we have, additionally to CEQA, the land use approval process, the fees and the costs, we have a myriad of regulations from so many state boards and agencies that we really need to think about in order to really solve our housing crisis and achieve more affordable and mid and middle housing. Because of the housing crisis, because of the regulations, it's really impacting our quality of life in California, particularly our home ownership numbers. Homeownership is the most important way to get generational wealth, to get out of poverty, to have equity, and create wealth. You know, we have the second lowest homeownership rate in the entire country at 56%, compared to 65% across the country. Only New York has a lower homeownership rate than California. According to PPIC in 2019, the homeownership rate for Latinos was 41.1% and 36.8% for Black Californians. So it's something we really need to work together on to really address housing overall, particularly home ownership.
Mr. Burke, may I interrupt quickly? What is the statistic for the API community?
You know, I do not have that number with me.
Okay.
But I could provide that to you.
Please, if you
Absolutely.
can, just to get a full picture of where where the different ethnic communities are lining up against each other. Okay.
Absolutely, I'll provide that number. So we're very enthusiastic about the $250 million in the budget this year for home ownership, assistance in the Cal Home program, and also the Dream for All program. But today, we're talking about what we can do for abatements, what can we do when we talk about tax policy to address the housing crisis. CBIA really recommends and would encourage this working group to look at the following policy proposals to really address the goal for more middle housing. Number one, you might want to think about a sales tax exemption for construction materials, particularly low-carbon materials, which is starting to become the future of construction given climate change. I know it's been in the materials, a lot of research about JPAs. We support JPAs, particularly when you're talking about acquiring properties from the private sector. You also want to maybe think about exempting the addition of an ADU from property taxes. You know, oftentimes the addition of an ADU triggers kind of a blended assessment, so maybe just exempt ADUs overall from just property taxes. You might want to think about a tax credit or a property tax exemption for on-site home water recycling systems. Once again, we want to definitely encourage housing production. We also want to think about sustainability and climate change as well. We also want to maybe think about property tax exemptions for already paid impact fees. Oftentimes, we're kind of in the home building industry, we're double taxed, we're triple taxed. It's, hey, you know what? Pay impact fees for parks, for schools, for libraries, for all these societal goods that society should pay for as a whole, not just on the home building industry, then also pay property tax and pay other taxes. So you might want to think about reducing that burden off the back of new construction by, you know, exempting impact fees from property taxes. Obviously, you might think about increasing the homeowner's exemption. We do have a low-income housing tax credit. You might want to think about creating a middle income tax credit as well for that product type category. And just lastly, number 8, we really would encourage this body and the state overall to really stop taxing housing. We're seeing a lot of taxes on vacant properties, on underutilized lands. We think it's bad public policy to tax housing, to fund housing. It doesn't make sense. And just it was mentioned earlier, but we want to expand upon it more right now, is that, yes, we have a lot of regulations in the home building industry. Yes, we want to think about how we could really increase production as quickly as possible. But one thing that we want to encourage the body to look at, and also the state legislature and policymakers, is that the workforce challenges in the home building industry. We really need to think about more CTE education, more construction trade education, so we can have the workforce to build the housing that we need for our future. On average, it takes about 20 different trades to build a house. These are good quality jobs. We really have not invested in the training to have a robust workforce to build housing. So we want to definitely think about encouraging more women in construction trade. You want to think about how do we train minority and lower income and second chance youth and adults in the construction trades. We want to think about how do we provide job training and workforce training in the construction arena to veterans and transitioning military. And we also want to just change the overall perception of construction industry. Oftentimes when you go to school, it's college only, and there's many opportunities to be successful in life. The construction industry is a great industry, and we want to encourage definitely everyone to take advantage of those opportunities in that industry. So just thank you so much for allowing me to speak today about the perspective from us as home builders. We are the solution to the housing crisis. If you remove the regulations off our back, the taxes, the fees, let us produce the housing that we need to fulfill the demand here in our great state of California. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate your thoughtful presentation. Are there very quick questions for Mr. Burke? Mr. Gaines, down here? Nope. Okay, Mr. Gaines,
Just,
got it.
thank you for your presentation. I agree with your statements that we clearly have challenges from a regulatory standpoint. If we could streamline a lot of the agencies, there was some discussion earlier this morning about efforts to do that. So the process would be simpler and quicker to get to the approval process. I've seen some success in the city of Folsom and Roseville in terms of producing a lot of housing stock, 20,000 units in Folsom, which is only about an 80,000 folks in the whole city, and yet they're producing all these units. Roseville's had good success too in the western portion, and we just need to see more of that statewide. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Member Gaines. And,
Okay.
Roseville is building equivalent to the city of Pasadena right now. So Roseville is definitely the model and the gold standard. So thank you so much.
All right, we're going to pivot to our presenters that are online. We've got Mr. Ray Pearl, who's the Executive Director of the California Housing Consortium, and then we're going to hear from Mr. Kenneth T. Lombard, who's the President and CEO of Brush Housing.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to thank Mr. Burke for his presentation. We need to receive it, but the legislative people really need to receive it. And when we sum up our work today, I would like to be marked as being in support of reducing or removing a lot of the taxation of the building industry. I think he had some very good points that aren't being heard as much as it should be. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
As I was saying, we are going to hear from two more speakers, and so let's reserve our questions for after both speakers make their presentation. And then after this presentation, we're going to hear from a few others. So, Mr. Ray Pearl, are you ready to go?
I am indeed.
All right, welcome. It's good to see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Board Chair Cohen and board members. My name is Ray Pearl. I'm the Executive Director of the California Housing Consortium. CHC is a statewide advocacy group for the production and preservation of affordable housing throughout the state of California. We work with partners like Cornelius and his group at CBIA and fill out the entirety of the home building industry to ensure that low-income Californians are also a part of new housing supply. We know that there is a problem in California right now. There's a shortage of approximately 1.2 million homes for low-income households. More than 50% of California's 6 million renters are low-income, with more than 1 million of them extremely low-income. 78% of extremely low-income households are severely cost-burdened, which means that more than 50% of their income is spent on rent. And that's compared to 53% of very low-income households, 24% of low-income households, and 6% of moderate-income households. And what is the cause? You've already heard from Cornelius, and we concur. There simply has not been enough housing created in California over the last half century. I'm going to go through a number of factors. You've heard some of them from Cornelius, and I agree with much of what he said. I'm going to emphasize a few of them. But there are a combination of factors that contribute to the insufficient number of housing units that meet Californians' needs. And what I just want to stress to all of you is that many of these affect both the market rate and home ownership world, as well as the affordable and rental world. But I want to also make sure and emphasize that although we agree with the argument that we need to increase supply, all of the statistics show it and the reality on the ground shows it, there will always be a need for deed-restricted affordable housing for our state's most vulnerable residents. Supply will not alone solve this problem, and that is primarily because of the rents that need to be charged in order to keep people in their homes. Some of the barriers to production, Cornelius mentioned, and I just want to underscore, local permitting and zoning barriers, local NIMBYs, the actions of city councils. Not only do I advocate for housing in my day job, but as an aside, I'm the mayor pro tem of Westlake Village and have spent the last 4 years on our city council. And I see firsthand how challenging and difficult it is to educate our residents and to educate our community members about the importance of increasing the housing supply. And it is a challenge, but it is one that is worthwhile. And I think I'm going to address a little bit later some of the great things that are already in progress from Sacramento in trying to encourage yeses from local city councils. Some of the other concerns that are happening today include mounting construction costs, supply chain issues, in many parts of the state, a shortage of labor. We also have a lot of limitations in our affordable housing world on our financing for affordable housing. In order to reduce rents, affordable housing developers rely on public dollars and tax credits. And then you'll hear throughout a debate about affordable housing is how do we target those units? Do we want to build more extremely low? Do we want to do more moderate? But the greater the rent reduction, the depth of affordability, the more dollars that are needed, and therefore the fewer units that can be produced. After all, even government has a finite amount of resources. Although California has more than doubled production of new affordable units in the past 3 years, the state is currently only funding 16% of what it needs to meet its goals. We are also limited by the federal low-income housing tax credit. I want to draw your attention, I'm sure mentioned earlier, is the state accelerator program. And that is a great example of how the state can actually increase production of affordable housing outside of the tax credit program. One of the reasons why those are so incredibly important, and I just want to draw brief attention to it, is the system that's been created over the last 10 years since the demise of redevelopment. It has really set back affordable housing production tremendously, and it is something that now, 11 years later, we are still digging ourselves out from under. What can we do about it, though? Those are the problems. There are solutions. We spend a lot of our time at CHC working with the legislature to reduce permitting and zoning barriers. One of the bills I want to address is our primary focus this year, and that is AB 2011. It goes with some of the earlier comments, Mr. Gaines, that you were mentioning, and a couple of earlier presenters. And AB 2011 seeks to utilize underutilized commercial corridors throughout our cities in California to build housing on, and that housing would be either affordable housing or mixed income housing. In return, what the bill provides is not only labor requirements to the tune of prevailing wage and health care and enforcement. In return for those, there's by right development for affordable housing or mixed income housing in those commercial zones. And the reason all of this works is you heard earlier about time being money and the uncertainty in the development process. A bill like AB 2011 would be a sea change for California in attempting to thread the needle for the need for housing production and overcoming some of the local opposition. In the past, we've worked on bills like AB 1763, a density reform bill that was carried by then Assemblymember Chu, and I'm sure you heard earlier today about SB 35 and other streamlining bills. SB 35 is an outstanding bill for the affordable housing community. It has proven to be a challenge on the mixed income side because of the labor requirements, but it is still a step in the right direction. And bills like that certainly move the needle and help us build more housing. One of the other things I want to focus on is enforcement, and where the state of California has truly helped is through the Housing Accountability Act and the work that HCD is doing to make themselves aware of when housing is coming before local governments, and especially examining those situations where housing seems to be rejected only because of NIMBY issues. While reducing costs are something that we obviously focus on, whether those are impact fees, the impact of CEQA, so many of those costs are fixed costs, and some of the biggest challenges we have in this space are competing priorities. We have worked at times to try to streamline the affordable housing finance system. You heard earlier from Nancy Robles, the alphabet soup of financing agencies that California works on certainly doesn't make affordable housing finance any easier. The other thing I want to focus on is that a lot of politicians and the media want to point fingers at affordable housing and why it costs so much to build. But I want to keep in mind our reality, and that is that affordable housing is one of the only issues that you look to build affordable housing, and yet there are so many other considerations that come into play. And so many of them are well-meaning, so many of them serve great public policy goals, but if your real goal is to build housing and affordable housing, does every building have to be the greenest in the nation, in the highest resource areas? Must it be built with unionized labor 100% of the time? Does it always have to have public art? Is there a different way to pay for parks? Do we overpark our developments? The answer is yes. So a lot of those things can be worked on, and I think it is the best of intentions, but it certainly increases the difficulty in producing housing. Lastly, I want to focus on the funding and some of the things that I know that you are working on. The welfare property tax exemption, in case anybody is wondering, it is an absolutely critical tool to our affordable housing developers. They all use it, they rely on it, it absolutely makes a difference. Governor Newsom has certainly prioritized, and the legislature, funding for affordable housing through the state $500 million tax credit. That paired along with the federal tax credit is absolutely critical to the toolbox for how we produce affordable housing. And lastly, I mentioned earlier, programs like the Accelerator Program and Project Home Key are excellent models that allow us to build outside of the tax credit and have added new ways, along with ADUs, of providing some semblance of affordable housing. I hope that the state, through agencies like yours, will continue not only the rhetoric on producing affordable housing, but will truly put that rhetoric to work and put forth policies that you all are considering to truly impact our ability to produce affordable housing. I want to thank you for having me today. My team and I look forward to working with you all as you come up with more solutions for our state housing crisis. And most importantly, I want to thank you for seeking out a wider range of opinions and for including us. And I thank you for the time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pearl. I appreciate your presentation. We're going to, please don't leave just yet. We want to hear from Mr. Ken Lombard, and then we'll probably pose questions to all three of you at that one, at the end of Mr. Lombard's presentation. So, Mr. Lombard, are you still with us? I saw you earlier.
I am here. I don't think my camera is working, but hopefully you can hear me.
Oh, it was working before.
It was, huh?
Yeah.
How about
That's okay. If you want to keep it off or can't turn it on, that's fine.
Yeah, no, I've tried. We've been working on it while we're waiting in line. But let me just jump in first, and I want to thank you and the board for allowing us to participate in this conversation. I think I lost count after approximately 50 plus recommendations on everything that needs to happen to try to facilitate the continued ability to address what has been described as a crisis in affordable housing. Bridge has obviously been a leader in the development of affordable housing over the years, haven't been around for the last 40 years. We continue to work very hard at really attempting to address what is not only a crisis, but my hope is with your board and its members that you begin to put it into a category which I would describe as mission critical. You're hearing lots of suggestions, which include tax exemption to cover the units that are restricted up to 120% AMI, which is going to help us provide consistency, predictability, and more sustainable operating budgets for developments that serve that missing middle. All deed and regulatory agreements, restricted units properties should be treated the same way. Reduce operating costs means affordable restricted units can support more debt, use less public funds, and perhaps allow developers to build additional units. And you have heard a lot about just overall attempting to streamline the process and address some of the tax exemptions that are going to be necessary for us to move forward. From where we sit, and I've asked Catherine Fleming to kind of join me to add, she heads up our affordable housing. You know, my perspective comes from having been involved in the development side of the business for over 30 years, but primarily on the market rate side. And I can tell you how transactions take place there and how, as we find in most markets, you find more overbuilt situation versus an inability to try to get things out of the starting phase. I've invested capital on the institutional side for everyone from CalPERS, CalSTRS, UC Regents, LA County, Texas Teachers, New York City, New York State Common, and the like. We have to go at this in a way that we begin to figure out. My hope is with these conversations that you all will hone in on, call it the 2 or 3 things at least, to be able to make some progress with respects to what needs to take place so that we can try to streamline the process. We currently have approximately 14,000 units. We have a pipeline of an additional 9,000 units. And we're doing everything that we can to try to address this problem in a way, but we are not the cure-all. We have to level the playing field so the developers, and frankly, not just the developers, but also those that are acquiring units for either conversion, those that are attempting to attract capital, alternative means of capital. We are one, as an example. We just were awarded $250 million from Morgan Stanley, NEF, for additional acquisition of affordable units. We are staying 100% committed to the affordable mission. We will continue to try to do everything that we can to work with bodies like yourself, providing suggestions. My hope is again, as you sit and listen to all sorts of interests, and there's some way to focus in on the few things that you think that are critical to try to move this mission forward. If we don't, we're going to continue to see, we're going to be stuck in the analysis and conversation stages of this, and we're not going to see the type of movement that we all know is needed if we're truly going to get the affordable crisis under some semblance of control. I promised Catherine that she could add some additional context, so if you don't mind, I'd like to hand it to Catherine and see if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Not at all, thank you. Hi, hello, Catherine, just introduce yourself to us.
Great. My name is Catherine Fleming. I'm Senior Vice President of Portfolio for Bridge Housing. And I just want to echo what Ken said, what Ray has said, what Ms. Sandage said, and others. The welfare tax exemption for affordable housing is incredibly important in the state of California. Bridge Housing has over 11,000 rental homes across 110 properties here in California, and we are only able to operate our properties to the high extent that they are because of this property tax exemption. And we do have properties that serve some of the missing middle, and it's always been a goal of Bridge to do more, but the lack of exemption for those units has always made it difficult. As Ms. Ferguson from Cal HFA said, the 80/20 properties can be hard to make work from a financial standpoint when you don't have the property tax exemption there. And so as Ken said, one area of streamlining that would really benefit is if it's possible to have the property tax exemption be available for any unit that has a rent restriction tied to it, whether that's 80% or 120%. If the rent is restricted, that will make a huge difference to be able to operate these properties, to build more units, and continue to keep them sustainable over the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that last tidbit in particular. Let me turn to my colleagues to see if there's any questions for the panel. On my right? Nothing? How about on my left? Senator Gaines? No? Okay. We are all getting a pass today. But your presentations were incredibly thoughtful. In particular, Mr. Burke, I think you were saying tax credits, the suggestion of creating a missing middle tax credit was really interesting, and I see Catherine nodding her head to be in agreement. She's online. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate your time, everyone. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you. We'll follow up directly with you. Thank you, Mr. Pearl. Thank you, Mr. Lombard. All right, folks, we are almost close to our lunch break. We've got about another 20 more minutes. We've got two more folks that we're going to hear from. Ms. Cicchetti, could you please call the next speakers?
Yes, the next speakers are on Housing Advocates Perspective. We have Dwayne Crenshaw, President and CEO of Sacramento Urban League, and Susie Shannon, Policy Director, Housing is a Human Right, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and the City of Los Angeles Health Commissioner. Please come forward.
Thank you. I believe they're online.
I thought that Mr. Crenshaw was in.
Mr. Crenshaw, are you here?
No, he's online.
He's online, Mr.
Remote.
All right, Mr. Crenshaw, please
Yeah.
turn your camera on.
Camera's on.
And then Susie Shannon, Ms. Shannon, are you there? If so, please turn your camera on. All right, Mr. Crenshaw, we see you first. We welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the body. I'm Dwayne Crenshaw, President and CEO of the Greater Sacramento Urban League, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, what I would say from a human perspective, from a person perspective, from someone who has experienced the challenges of home ownership. So you've heard a lot already about regulation and the development of properties. We are currently developing 32 units in Sacramento. Financing is a challenge. The regulations are a challenge, as you've heard. But I really want to speak today about how are we impacting individual home buyers, homeowners in the state of California, and as you look at property tax and tax policy in general. So I want to start off with a little bit of personal background. I know the struggles of home ownership and being foreclosed on. I will never forget the one and only time that I saw my father cry was when the marshal came to evict us the day after Christmas in 1987 from the home that he had worked for with a middle-class job in San Diego in the shipyards, a job that left him permanently disabled and unable to pay those bills. I know that for the next 10 years, my mother's sole goal was not just to buy a home, again, to be an owner, but she simply wanted the dignity and respect of having a washer and dryer in her garage and not having to go to the laundromat or lugging clothes across an apartment complex. And I personally, in the last bubble, and I pray that we don't experience another bubble in the very near future, lost my home when the market burst in 2009. And so we are knowing we're perhaps on the precipice of recession. We may be in recession, and the home prices have skyrocketed. A lot of folks have bought in, and I'm concerned about individual home buyers being able to maintain those homes and experiencing that. So from a real personal perspective, how do we create more opportunity for home ownership for communities of color? We know that the home ownership rate for Black and brown folks is abysmal. In Sacramento County, where we are, it is the lowest Black homeownership rate at 17% in the state of California. We know that obviously there's a personal affordable housing crisis to buy into home ownership in the American dream or the California dream, as it may be. So a few policy suggestions on increasing home ownership for people of color. One, are there ways with policy where we can do property tax deferral or postponement towards at the financing, at the upfront part of the home buying process where folks are trying to get a mortgage and a loan? Are there ways to set aside for low income, or not low income, communities of color, people of color, first time home buyers with property tax deferrals or postponement to help ease their financing and their debt burden in qualifying for home ownership? I'm wondering if there are possibilities of other tax exemptions for, like we currently do for seniors and disabled and veteran and some other categories of individuals. We know, and we're in the state of California where we've seen the impacts of slavery, and we know the historic discrimination and the redlining that has forced many people of color out of the market and out of generational wealth creation in society. And so I have a lot of law school debt, but I'm not a total legal scholar, but I would propose and put out there for the group to think about, the body to think about, is there a way that perhaps there is a compelling government need, that there's a narrowly tailored exemption created for people of color, first-time home buyers, those who have experienced racial and systemic oppression historically in our great state. As we look at tax policies or other policies to hopefully spur on home ownership, I also want to encourage, whatever the policy may be, that we oftentimes tie housing to income, area median income. And while our income gap still exists, we've done a great deal of work in recent years closing that income gap. Where we have not done so well and where we have actually gone backwards, and it's been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, is the wealth gap. So, for example, there are a number of Black and brown middle class folks who make a decent wage, who have earned a decent income, who are excluded from all of the home buyers assistance programs because they're locked in at 80% AMI, even if you go to 120% AMI. So, but the challenge is they don't have the down payment, which is what many of these programs do to spur home ownership, is down payment assistance. And so I would encourage this body to think about, to consider the wealth gap as a measurement tool. Because we know that for Black and white folks in America, Black folks' net worth is 1/6 of the traditional white family's net worth. So there is no down payment gift from a family member or a parent or a grandparent. There is no inheritance to fund that. And if whatever worth we have tied up, much of it is locked into negative debt, things that don't appreciate, that don't gain equity. So it's not building the wealth gap. So again, whatever programs or policies you may be considering, you may put forward, really thinking about if there is a wealth gap metric that we would like to look at, net worth as opposed to or in addition to income in its own right, because that is locking out a number of people. And then I think lastly, I would like to speak beyond the individual, but what are we doing for broader community economic development? So as we heard from builders and affordable housing advocates, there are obviously a number of exemptions and tax breaks and credits. Those are wonderful. I'm wondering, though, if we may carve out, whether it be in opportunity zones or promise zones, areas that we've already designated as being economically impacted and underserved historically. Are there property tax exemptions, abatements, deferrals that can be put into those areas based upon their status in the opportunity zone or a promise zone or other economic empowerment zone, so that the community economic development is happening in the areas that have been most negatively affected by tax policy, housing policy, number of policies in general in our great state. So I just wanted to throw those ideas out. One, how do we focus in on individuals in this conversation? How do we apply tax policy to that, exemptions, deferrals, postponements, perhaps a carve out to increase the homeowners exemption, and again, those targeted neighborhoods to bring back people into communities that need to be redeveloped and brought up. And so I just want to throw those out to you today, and I appreciate your time, and I won't continue on because many of the policy ideas have been shared earlier in your session today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We're going to hear from our next speaker, Mr. Crenshaw, so don't go away just yet in case we have questions for you. But our next
Great.
speaker is Commissioner Susie Shannon, who's the Policy Director of Housing is a Human Right, as well as connected to the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. How are you, Ms. Shannon? The floor is yours.
This is still from the current thing we're on. Catherine Fleming, she was our
Oh.
last one from Bridge Housing as well.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Is that you, Ms. Shannon?
That's Susie.
Susie Shannon?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'm here. Someone was talking.
Yes, okay, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Okay, great. I just wanted to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to address the board today. I have worked with our unhoused population since 2005, and definitely in the realm of housing, and also as the former president of the Health Commission for the City of Los Angeles. And I'm still a commissioner, working at the intersection of housing and homelessness and healthcare. So I wanted to just dive right in, if I could, with the welfare property tax exemption. So there are a lot of developers who right now are building without government money. Kaiser Foundation, Hilton Foundation, and a development group are putting $100 million into housing without taking any government money. AIDS Healthcare Foundation also has been buying a lot of single-room occupancy hotels, which are fairly large, usually 100 to 200 units, as well, not using government money. And then there are some Catholic groups who have been doing that as well. And the understanding among a lot of the developers and just nonprofits who are buying these buildings and trying to help, particularly to house people who are unhoused, is that you have to take government money in order to get the welfare tax exemption for property taxes. And so there's a $20 million cap. So once you exceed that, and so obviously Kaiser Foundation will exceed that fairly quickly. AIDS Healthcare Foundation has exceeded that $20 million cap. You're paying exorbitant amounts in property taxes, which are set as though you're renting out the property for market rate. And so it's a disincentive. And I think, assessors have gone so far as to say, you need to get the maximum value out of your property. But of course, that doesn't help our housing crisis, and it certainly doesn't help our homeless crisis. And so we have 171,000 people who are homeless in the state of California. And I don't want to appeal to you on a humanitarian level regarding that, but I would like to appeal to you on a financial level, because that is costing our government $45,000 to $55,000 per person that's chronically homeless on our streets. And by moving people indoors, we actually could save a lot of money. We also have a lot of people who are dying on the streets. There are over 1,500 people who died in the city of Los Angeles. So moving them in to housing as quickly as possible is really a life or death, and that's for a lot of people. So one of the things we would like to see, and I think that I made this recommendation before, is that any rent-restricted unit or property, whether that be, an SRO, a single-room occupancy building, if the entire building's taking Section 8, or even half of it is Section 8, that they be allowed to apply for that, not just apply, but receive that welfare tax exemption on property taxes. It's right now acting as a barrier, and if that barrier were removed, I think it would stimulate more affordable housing being built. A lot of nonprofit groups don't want to wait for the government money to come in. It could take 3 to 5 years, holding up whether you're buying a building or building from the ground up. I know that we'll be building 221 units downtown in the Skid Row area without any use of government money. And so we would like to see some kind of action by the board which clarifies for assessors that if you have a building that's 100% affordable housing, in some cases where people are being charged about $400 in rent in Los Angeles for extremely low income folks, that is considered eligible for the property tax exemption. I think that, right now it's just very hard, as we know, to get housing built. But there are actually a lot of buildings too that can be bought. We've lost thousands and thousands of units of single room occupancy hotels, and a lot of them are vacant right now. And some of them are being converted into luxury housing. So whatever we can do to stop that, it could actually bring people in within months as opposed to years off the streets. So I think that would be extremely helpful. I have worked on this issue for a very, very long time. I know I've addressed some of you already on this crisis. I tried to bring up really just solutions on how we can not just solve the homeless crisis, but also for low-income tenants. And so I'll give you a figure. For the last housing element for the city of Los Angeles, based on our RENA numbers, that's a regional housing assessment number that comes from, for the whole Southern California region. The city of Los Angeles underbuilt 34,000 units of extremely low, very low, low, and moderate housing. At the same time in that 7-year period, they overbuilt market rate housing by 70,000 units. None of the clients that I have helped over the years have ever been helped by market rate housing. There's also a secondary barrier, which is not necessarily a BOE issue, but maybe something that you could help with policy, is that the application process for a lot of the affordable housing requires 36 months of permanent rental history. So that means for a lot of housing that's deemed affordable, it excludes people who are not only currently homeless, but also have been homeless the last 3 years. So we need to be very clear that we're stimulating the building of homeless housing to help that 171,000 people in California who are homeless, but that we're also making sure that even if somebody isn't unhoused, but is applying for affordable housing, that they're not excluded because they've been homeless in the last 3 years. So these are just some of the barriers that we're facing, really as a state. And there have been states that have, brought in our chronic homeless the chronic homeless population, and that was the state of Utah. And they reached functional zero in chronic homelessness, and they did that in a housing first model. So that means either building housing or converting a lot of motels or hotels into permanent housing, not interim housing. And they were able to save in Utah $8,000 to $12,000 per person. Here we're saving in the tens of thousands per person by bringing people off the street. And I really feel that the BOE can play a critical role here in providing a property tax exemption for a lot of the nonprofits who are trying to do the right thing, but they're getting hit with millions of dollars in taxes. That's all money that could go into affordable housing, but is not. Instead, it's going, to other places and maybe into a general fund, which may or may not be used for housing. So I appreciate you again allowing me to speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for making time to come and speak with us and share your perspective. Let me just open up to the entire panel. Check in with my colleagues to see if there are any questions for this group of speakers. And again, these are the speakers speaking from the housing advocacy perspective. Senator Gaines, any questions? Yes, please. Senator Gaines has a question for, and this is again directed towards Mr. Crenshaw and Ms. Shannon.
Yeah, this would be for Ms. Shannon. I thank you for your presentation and this idea that you have about for 100% affordable, rental units to not pay property taxes sounds like something that could help in terms of making those projects more affordable. I'm assuming from a developer standpoint, do they make the project pencil better because of that option?
Yes, so if you take away the property taxes, you reduce the cost per unit. So it does actually help a lot. Right now, I mean, to convert existing infrastructure, so that's called adaptive reuse, where you take an existing building that has the infrastructure and you convert it into housing, that costs about $100,000 per unit. If you compare that to the $500,000 to $700,000 that we're paying to build from the ground up, you can see there's a huge difference in terms of really what government is paying or a nonprofit is paying. But we want to make sure that we're getting the best value for each of the units. So it does lower the cost per unit if you take away the property tax.
Great, thank you. And a question for Mr. Crenshaw. Thank you for your presentation. I was just looking at a statistic that was saying that since the year 2000, black ownership rate in America has declined by 770,000 homeowners. So I'm just wondering, I had read an article that during the Great Recession that home ownership it declined across the board, but it was most chronic in the black community. Can you expand on that?
Yes, thank you. And
Yeah.
as I was sharing earlier, I was personally one of those folks. And the reason for that in large part is that communities of color, black homeowners, black buyers were really targeted and set up with predatory lending and loans that they were not fixed, that were very adjustable, variable rate loans. And so when the recession hit, many folks were greatly underwater with bad loans, and there was no way out. And so there was an intentional marketing to the communities of color, black people, brown people, that put them into bad loans, that they were set up from failure from the outset. And so that's one, and that's obviously a historical practice. And then access in general to mortgages for black families is the rejection rate for traditional financing through a bank or institution, of course, is much higher for black people. So they are targeted and left with the market that preyed on them and set them up for failure with interest rates and the variable unfixed loans.
Thank you. Hopefully we've solved a lot of that with the reforms that occurred in the lending industry. But in terms of helping folks get into a home, certainly we need to take a look at some of these assistant programs in terms of helping out with the down payment. I like some of these ideas that were presented earlier with 10% down that could, after 5 years of ownership, would go away, actually be a grant, and then they had the 20% option, which would be a shared ownership, which gives people a lift and an opportunity to gain that equity and then maybe move on beyond that.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we're wrapping things up for lunch. Let's see, do you have a question, Mr. Vasquez?
Just a quick wrap up. One, just to thank Susie Shannon. I've had the opportunity to visit some of those adaptive reuse buildings in LA that your organization's worked on. And I know you've been working real hard on it. Now, you mentioned that there was an issue still, and I think it's still pending, where these folks that are trying to build, actually in the developers that are in the market rate housing are still getting dinged for building affordable housing units. Is that still an issue?
Yeah, so I mean, the main issue, and it's not the necessarily developers and market rate, but nonprofits that buy buildings and basically, I mean, SRO buildings are rent restricted. And typically the tenant is paying about $400 to $600 a month. They're not getting assessed based on the fact that they're offering affordable housing. They're getting assessed as though they're offering market rate housing. And so if you're a developer, it doesn't make any difference if you're providing 100% affordable housing or you're providing market rate housing if you're not waiting for like a government loan to come in order to build or to buy a building. So, it's not, there's, and this is primarily to house people who are extremely low income or low income, where we're not building for it, as I explained earlier, in the city of LA. So without that property tax exemption, there's literally no difference in terms of the property taxes that a developer is charged if they build affordable housing or they build, market rate where they could be charging $4,000 a month. So in other words, the developer charging $400 a month for rent is getting charged the same property taxes as the developer who's charging $4,000 for rent. That seems to me very unfair, and it doesn't do much to promote the building or buying of affordable housing.
All right, that answers that. All right, thank you very much. We are going to pause for...
Excuse me, yeah, before we go, we've been advised that we should do our public comments at this time.
Okay, just a minute, please. To the speakers that are online, Mr. Crenshaw and Ms. Shannon, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate your presentation. We are going to now pivot to take public comment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the auditorium who would like to make a public comment? They could come forward at this time. Seeing none, we do have a person who signed up for a public comment, Louis Marante, VP of Public Policy. Please come forward.
Okay, I'm getting a signal that he's not here.
All righty.
Thank you.
Okay, then all is good.
All right, thank you. It is approximately 1:45, and we are going to take a 30-minute lunch break. Thank you very much, staff. We will reconvene at 2:15. Thank you.